Hi everyone, and welcome back to Crime Whisper. I know you can't sleep, so I'll sit with you tonight, sharing crime stories from around the world that are as haunting as they are real. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from if you enjoy this kind of content. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe now. Let's dive into tonight's case. Case 1. Jeremy Bailey, a family annihilation in Utah on the morning of May 19th. 2023, at exactly 9:45 a.m., a chilling call came into dispatch. Jeremy Bailey, 34 years old, confessed that he had just killed his wife, his in-laws, and even the family's dogs. When police arrived at the Layton, Utah residence, they entered through the front door and were immediately confronted with a gruesome sight. 2 dogs lay dead at the bottom of the stairs upstairs. They discovered 3 victims each in a separate bedroom. A 3rd dog was found, shot in the basement. The victims were identified as Anastasia Stevens, 36, Bailey's wife, Donald Stevens, 73, Anastasia's father, Becky Stevens, 61, Anastasia's stepmother. Each had been shot, and spent shell casings were located near every victim, including beside the dead pets. Investigators also found a black handgun with the slide locked back and the magazine removed, an open handgun magazine, and 2 cell phones on the kitchen table. Search of the home and vehicles turned up a receipt for ammunition. Surveillance footage from a nearby store confirmed that Bailey had purchased that ammunition just 45 minutes before making his horrifying confession when police arrived at the house. Bailey called dispatch again, this time to say he was ready to surrender. He calmly walked out of the home, complied with officers, and was taken into custody without incident. Bailey's cold confession at the station. Bailey told investigators he had shot his wife, her parents, and 3 of the family's 4 dogs about 20 minutes before calling 911. He admitted he had stored the weapon in a friend's garage days earlier as part of his plan to carry out the murders. That friend later confirmed to police that Bailey had handed him the gun on May 17th. Bailey said he used a Springfield 9mm handgun, ironically one that belonged to one of the victims according to court records. Bailey and his wife had been fighting one of the victims, even texted a therapist that morning saying the family was facing serious problems that may require legal action. The message ended abruptly with, "I can't talk right now, Jeremy is here." Shortly after the killings, Bailey took to his wife's Facebook page and posted a confession. "I just killed everyone. Here's my address." He called it a massacre. He later told police he had shot Anastasia twice in their bedroom. Her parents, who were in nearby rooms, were killed moments later. Bailey also asked officers not to send the surviving family dog to a shelter, and then asked if Utah still used the death penalty or firing squad, saying he'd rather die than spend his life in prison. The legal outcome: Bailey was charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, 3 counts of felony firearm discharge, and 3 counts of aggravated animal cruelty. In October 2023, during a virtual court appearance, Bailey accepted a plea deal. He admitted he had carefully planned the murders for several days, despite his defense team's argument that his mental state played a role. The prosecution pursued the harshest penalties as part of the plea. The death penalty was removed from consideration on December 12, 2023. Jeremy Bailey was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. This case serves as a devastating example of how unresolved domestic conflict can spiral into horrifying, premeditated violence. Case 2. Jeremy Dwayne Belt, the murder of grandparents Thomas and Janice Walker. Our next story takes us to Clearfield, Utah. Just a year earlier, in November 2022, Thomas and Janice Walker were beloved community members who had been married for over 60 years. They served with the Clearfield Citizens Patrol for more than a decade and were known as generous, quiet, and dependable people there. Grandson, 26-year-old Jeremy Dwayne Belt, had been showing increasing signs of paranoia and mental instability. On November 23, 2022, a family argument turned fatal that morning. Belt argued with his mother, claiming he could feel an electric current in the room and accusing his grandparents of trying to harm him during the argument. He kicked his mother in the face, prompting her to flee the home later that day. Belt confronted his grandparents in the garage. As they were trying to leave, he had already cut the garage door's motor cord. Trapping them inside, he then took a small sledgehammer and began smashing their car. And when they tried to stop him, he kicked them both in the chest with his grandparents injured and on the ground. Belt left the garage, retrieved a .22 caliber rifle, and returned to shoot Janice Walker in the head, realizing he needed more bullets. He left again to reload, then came back and shot Thomas Walker dead after the killings. He locked the rifle away, went to the basement, and waited discovery and arrest around 3:10 p.m. Belt's mother returned home and found the bodies of her parents in the garage. She immediately called 911 and told police she suspected her son when Clearfield officers arrived. They removed her from the scene and surrounded the house after a brief phone conversation. Belt agreed to surrender and was arrested initially. He denied the killings, claiming his grandparents had attacked him and that he found them injured upon returning home. However, surveillance footage disproved this, clearly showing Belt in the garage at the time of the murders. Mental health and legal proceedings. Belt was charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder and additional counts related to the assault on his mother and property destruction. His defense raised concerns about his mental health, pointing to delusions and hallucinations he may have experienced. Family members and friends described Thomas and Janice as selfless, devoted, and gentle souls, taken far too soon by someone they loved. Outro somber tone to families to tragedies, both rooted in domestic turmoil, untreated mental distress, and escalating violence. Jeremy Bailey and Jeremy Belt, 2 men whose names are now associated with unimaginable betrayal, destruction, and loss. Let these stories be a grim reminder. Violence often begins with warning signs, and when those signs are ignored or dismissed, the consequences can be irreversible. Thank you for staying with me tonight on Crime Whisper. If these stories moved you, please consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. And until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the real monsters live inside our homes. Case 2 continued. Jeremy Dwayne Belt, a grandson's betrayal. Jeremy Dwayne Belt initially claimed that he had found his grandparents injured when he arrived home on November 23, 2022. But investigators quickly found evidence that unraveled his story. Faced with the facts, Belt changed his account, confessing that he had murdered his grandparents, Thomas and Janice Walker, in cold blood. He detailed the gruesome attack, first kicking them, then bludgeoning them with a hammer, and finally shooting them both with a .22 caliber rifle. He admitted to using methamphetamine the night before, and on the day of the murders, he had taken marijuana and Xanax. During a search of Belt's basement bedroom, investigators recovered multiple controlled substances including cocaine, mushrooms, marijuana, and several drug paraphernalia items, pipes, bongs, grinders, and glass jars. They also seized the .22 caliber rifle used in the killings. Based on Belt's confession and the physical evidence, he was arrested without resistance and held without bail at the Davis County Jail. He faced 2 counts of aggravated murder, along with additional charges including illegal possession of a firearm, assault, and drug possession, as he was legally barred from owning any weapons. Legal proceedings and shocking history. In July 2024, Belt appeared in Davis County Circuit Court for his preliminary hearing as part of a plea agreement. Belt pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, reducing the original charge of aggravated murder, which could have led to the death penalty. In exchange, the court dropped the other charges, including drug and weapon offenses. In September 2024, Belt's trial began. Prosecutors painted a picture of a deeply premeditated murder. They argued that Belt had intentionally disabled the garage door motor, trapping his grandparents inside before carrying out the attack. The evidence showed a disturbing sequence: a sledgehammer to disable and brutalize then a rifle to finish them off. But the prosecution's case didn't stop there. They revealed Belt had a violent past in 2019. He had been charged with third-degree assault after slamming his ex-girlfriend's head into a car and choking her until she lost consciousness. In the very same garage where his grandparents were later murdered. Defense sentencing and outcome. The defense argued that Belt was mentally unstable and heavily influenced by drugs at the time of the murders. His attorneys cited a long-standing history of mental illness and emotional instability. They insisted the crime was not calculated, but the result of a drug-fueled psychotic break to avoid the death penalty. The defense emphasized Belt's cooperation, his remorse, and his willingness to plead guilty. They suggested the attack was an emotional outburst during a tense family conflict, not a cold-blooded execution, but the court was unconvinced in the end. The severity of the crime, the methodical planning, and the overwhelming brutality left little room for leniency. Jeremy Dwayne Belt, age 28, was sentenced to 2 consecutive prison terms of 15 years to life, total of 30 years to life. With the possibility of parole only decades down the road, the court firmly concluded that the killings were indeed premeditated. New case. Shonda Vander Ark, a mother's unthinkable betrayal. Tonight, we turn to a case that shocked not only Michigan but the entire country, a tale of child abuse so severe it shattered every standard of human decency. In July 2022, the body of 15-year-old Timothy Ferguson was discovered in a horrific state in Norton Shores, Michigan. The teenager was emaciated, weighing only 69 pounds. His body bore signs of hypothermia, severe neglect, and prolonged abuse. What investigators found next was unthinkable. Timothy's mother, Shonda Vander Ark, was arrested shortly after authorities began their investigation. The home told its own story, one of violence, starvation, and calculated cruelty. Timothy had been confined to a basement closet, without furniture, blankets, or even basic hygiene. The only items in the space were a blue tarp and an Amazon box. The air reeked of urine and feces. The house was lined with security cameras. Locks had been installed on the refrigerator and pantry to prevent Timothy from accessing food. His mother, the one person meant to protect him, had done everything possible to isolate, humiliate, and torment him. Torture behind closed doors. But Shonda wasn't alone. Her adult son, Byron Ferguson, 20, had been left in charge of Timothy, and he was charged alongside her. Byron admitted to frequent abuse, even stating in a text, "I'm ready to kill Timothy." Messages between mother and son accused Timothy of faking his mental disability together. They orchestrated cruel punishments, forcing him to stand for hours facing a wall, making him run stairs while being chased, and even torturing him with Carolina Reaper hot sauce, which Byron poured into Timothy's mouth and unthinkably onto his genitals. Timothy was repeatedly forced into ice baths for hours, restrained with handcuffs and zip ties, and denied food for days. The morning before his death, Byron found Timothy unresponsive in a desperate and twisted attempt to wake him up. Shonda suggested heating up a pizza roll to lure him. When Timothy responded, she had Byron pull it away. Byron later admitted that Shonda instructed him to lie to police, claiming Timothy had voluntarily gone on a hunger strike. He initially obeyed, but the guilt overtook him, and eventually he told investigators the horrifying truth. Courtroom and sentencing. During the trial, Byron Ferguson pleaded guilty to first-degree child abuse. He was sentenced to 30 to 100 years in prison. Shonda Vander Ark stood trial for first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse in court. She retched and appeared to vomit when shown photos of Timothy's body. She claimed she couldn't remember the events leading to his death. Her lawyer attempted to portray her as an overwhelmed single mother, but the evidence told a different story. The prosecutor hammered home the contrast between how Shonda treated Timothy compared to her other children who were well-fed, educated, and safe. Timothy, on the other hand, was tortured until he died. Outro. Reflective emotional tone. These 3 stories, Jeremy Bailey, Jeremy Belt, and Shonda Vander Ark, show us the darkest corners of human nature, where love should live. Violence took root where protection was owed. Cruelty was given, and where families should have been safe havens, they became tombs. Let this be a reminder that vigilance, compassion, and intervention can save lives. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Stay aware, stay safe, and remember, monsters don't just live in the woods. Sometimes they sleep under the same roof. This is Crime Whisper. Until next time. Continuation: the sentencing of Shanda Vander Ark and Paul Ferguson. After his conviction, Paul Ferguson stood before the court and begged for leniency, asking the judge for compassion so he could learn from his mistakes. He said, "I know I'll pay the price for what I've done, but I'll never feel right again because he's still gone." Meanwhile, a few weeks after her sentencing, Shanda Vander Ark filed an appeal in an attempt to overturn the termination of her parental rights over her surviving 8-year-old Suna child, who had also lived in the house during Timothy's abuse. Her parental rights were legally severed in a separate civil case following her 2023 criminal conviction. But at the time of this script, the Court of Appeals has not yet ruled on either matter. On January 23, 2024, during her sentencing hearing, her two surviving children, Millie and Nolan, sat in the courtroom. Millie, filled with sorrow, expressed regret for not protecting her little brother. She recalled missed opportunities, like not telling him she loved him more. Nolan was more direct. He stated unequivocally that his mother should never be freed. Their voices were heard. Judge Matthew K. was visibly outraged. He labeled Shanda's actions as intentional torture, and when given a chance to speak, Shanda refused, showing no emotion or remorse. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole, with an additional 50 to 100 years for the extreme child abuse. Ford Ferguson, who pled guilty to first-degree child abuse, was sentenced by Judge Matthew C. 232, 100 years in prison. He was given credit for 5,992 days. Already served. The tragic death of Timothy Ferguson is a harrowing reminder that the most horrific crimes can happen within the walls of a home, hidden behind curtains and smiles. His story is a reflection of society's failure to detect and protect. Case transition: the disappearance of Natalia Martinez. Welcome back, detectives. Tonight, we move from the horrors of abuse to the heartache of mystery. This is the unsolved case of Natalia Martinez, a vibrant young woman whose disappearance still echoes through the coasts of Uruguay. Natalia's early life, a picture of normalcy. Born in the late 1980s in Montevideo, Uruguay's capital, Natalia Martinez was the youngest in her family. She was especially close with her sister Claudia, and together they grew up in a comfortable middle-class household there. Father worked as a senior salesman for an international home appliance company, providing the family with a stable life. Natalia was a cheerful, sociable teenager. Known for her warm personality and ability to connect with others, she maintained a tight-knit circle of friends throughout her school years. A birthday celebration. January 2007. In January 2007, Natalia turned 19. To celebrate, she and her friends took a vacation to La Paloma, a scenic resort town 2 weeks into their trip. On January 16th, they traveled to La Barra, near the city of Roca, to meet up with her family, who had joined them for a 4-day beach holiday. This wasn't a new destination for the Martinez family. They had visited this town many times before and were well known by the locals. The last night, January 18th. On January 18th, Natalia and Claudia decided to visit the nearby town of Punta del Este. About an hour away, they stopped for a spa treatment in the Sierra de San Antonio area, then planned to attend a party at the popular nightclub La Onda. Canada's evening fell. Claudia began to feel tired and chose to return to the family's accommodations, but Natalia was full of energy and insisted on continuing the night out with 3 of her close friends. The group stayed at the club until around 5 a.m. An unfinished conversation and a disappearance outside the club. Natalia was seen speaking with an old acquaintance, Leonardo Racaven, a bookstore owner. They stood near the club's exit, Deep in conversation, her friends, growing tired, decided to wait. In the car, one friend returned to check on Natalia, but when she got back to the spot, both Natalia and Leonardo were gone. Confused and increasingly worried, the girls searched the club. They spotted Leonardo's BMW in the parking lot. The windows were tinted, but they noticed movement inside. They knocked on the window and asked Leonardo about Natalia. Claimed he had only spoken with her briefly, and that they had parted ways shortly afterward. He said he was now with a friend, and had no idea what happened to Natalia after their conversation. Still unsure, the girls assumed Natalia had gone home separately. They drove off to alert Claudia's family, but received no response when they honked outside the house returning to the club. The girls searched for another 2 hours, but Natalia was nowhere to be found. The search begins. Rising panic at 8:00 a.m. One of Natalia's friends finally told her parents everything. They tried to reassure her, hoping Natalia had already returned home, but by 11:00 a.m., panic set in. Natalia's entire family mobilized. They searched local areas and returned to the club, but it had since closed. No one had seen or heard from her later that day. At 5:00 p.m., they reported her missing to police in Maldonado. The investigation officially began. Leads and Dead End's friends and family gave police several photos from the night of Natalia's disappearance, including one that showed what she was wearing. Police quickly developed a description and began searching initially. The police assumed Natalia had gotten drunk or taken drugs and left the club on her own, but her friends firmly denied this. They insisted Natalia had not consumed alcohol, nor did she ever use drugs. A key clue emerged. Throughout the night, a group of 3 men had repeatedly tried to approach Natalia and her friends. Her friends described their behavior as harassing, but investigators ignored this lead and instead focused entirely on Leonardo, the last known person to speak with Natalia, the prime suspect, or a red herring. Leonardo immediately became the primary suspect, but those who knew him described him as calm, intellectual, and non-violent. He owned a bookstore, had a steady girlfriend, and was considered a quiet businessman according to Leonardo. He spoke to Natalia briefly outside the club, then returned to his car where his girlfriend was waiting. He claimed he watched Natalia walk down the steps and onto the club's porch, before turning his attention to a conversation with his girlfriend. He never saw her again. Leonardo was not concerned at the time. He had no reason to believe something had gone wrong. To be continued. But something did go wrong. Natalia Martinez never came home. Was it a spontaneous abduction? A betrayal by someone familiar? Or did the police miss a crucial lead in those early hours? Join me next time on Crime Whisper as we continue to unravel the haunting disappearance of Natalia Martinez and examine the twists, theories, and the silence that still surrounds her fate. Until then, stay safe, stay awake, and remember, the truth doesn't sleep. Since there were no screams or commotion, Leonardo Racovan insisted he noticed nothing out of the ordinary that night, despite his calm demeanor. Police remained deeply suspicious. He was the last person seen with Natalia Martinez before she vanished, and investigators felt they had to pursue every angle. They secured a search warrant for Leonardo's BMW, which multiple witnesses had reported seeing in suspicious areas, including a wooded forest on the city's outskirts. One particularly troubling account came from a man who claimed he had seen a couple engaging in intimate activity in a car that matched Leonardo's near a lake in the woods the night Natalia went missing. During their inspection, police found a long dark hair on the car floor. It was immediately sent for DNA testing, but to their frustration, it didn't match Natalia. The car's interior appeared spotless. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no trace of Natalia's DNA to investigators. It looked like someone had gone to great lengths to clean the vehicle, perhaps shortly after she disappeared. This suspicious detail was added to the growing list of circumstantial evidence, but without anything definitive. Police couldn't charge Leonardo. Then came a chilling discovery on January 22nd. A passerby traveling along a remote road outside the town of P. Paulus spotted personal items scattered on the roadside. A woman's handbag, shoes, and a wallet among them were belongings later identified as Natalia's case. Already receiving intense media attention, suddenly exploded, unfortunately. With that came a tidal wave of rumors and misinformation. Some claimed Natalia had ties to drug dealers, suggesting she was targeted by organized crime. Her devastated father publicly denounced these claims, insisting his daughter was innocent and simply vanished without reason. False sightings, fabricated testimonies, and wild conspiracy theories began pouring in, overwhelming detectives every day. Officers had to sift through false leads, while the media sensationalized the most outrageous claims just to sell newspapers. Meanwhile, Natalia's family was left to endure a nightmare of grief, confusion, and public scrutiny. Massive search operation was launched. Police, family members, and hundreds of volunteers scoured the coastal regions, woodlands, and even sewer systems. Rescue dogs were deployed, helicopters swept the skies, the fire brigade and military joined the effort. But there was still no trace of the critical 48-hour window for recovering missing persons passed. Hope began to fade. Authorities quietly shifted their focus from a rescue to a recovery. Then, an unsettling lead. A bone was found in the Grande Plateau. Hope surged only for the forensic tests to confirm it wasn't human. Still, Natalia's family refused to give up. They were convinced she might still be alive, possibly held somewhere against her will. Then, in 2008, over a year after she vanished, her breakthrough in a forest near Lake Yo, several kilometers from the club where Natalia was last seen, a hiker stumbled upon a badly decomposed female body. It was found near a lake, tied with thin nylon thread nearby. Clothing matched what Natalia had been wearing the night she disappeared. Body was so deteriorated that identifying it took the combined efforts of 5 forensic experts. Eventually, they confirmed it. The remains belonged to Natalia Martinez. The autopsy revealed faint signs of strangulation, enough for investigators to believe her death was no accident. However, due to the advanced decomposition, they couldn't determine if she'd been sexually assaulted or exactly how she died. Poison and alcohol were ruled out, and the cause of death remained officially undetermined, but suspicious. Then, another shock. The man who had initially discovered Natalia's belongings on the roadside was found dead at the bottom of a cliff near his home. At first, police believed he had taken his own life, but his family strongly disagreed. He was devoutly religious, deeply family-oriented, and showed no signs of distress. The autopsy changed everything. The man had suffered blunt force trauma to the head before the fall. Investigators now suspected he'd been pushed off the cliff, possibly silenced. This revelation added a disturbing new layer. Someone was still out there. Someone willing to kill again. Tragedy struck the Martinez family yet again. Natalia's father, Ever Martinez, devastated by grief and consumed by the endless rumors surrounding his daughter's case, ended his life at their family home. His daughter Claudia and wife were the ones to find him. Police ruled it a suicide, and the family accepted the conclusion with no arrests and little hard evidence. The investigation seemed to be losing steam until a new piece of the puzzle emerged in a set of text messages sent just days before her disappearance. Natalia had mentioned a man she recently met online. That man, investigators would later learn, was one of the 3 young men seen sitting at a table in the nightclub the night Natalia disappeared. The same men who had been harassing her and her friends, despite being identified early in the investigation. The 3 young men seen near Natalia Martinez at the nightclub were initially overlooked by police. Several witnesses had pointed them out, but their testimonies weren't acted upon. Eventually, all 3 men, slightly older than Natalia, brought in for questioning. Their accounts conflicted regarding their whereabouts and actions on the night Natalia disappeared. Deepening police suspicion, a breakthrough came from a protected witness, the girlfriend of one of the men in custody. She told police that Rodrigo Verges, 25 at the time, had been involved in Natalia's death. Rodrigo had already raised concerns during earlier interrogations, by providing inconsistent and false statements, phone records, and surveillance footage. Began to build a circumstantial case, though DNA evidence collected from Rodrigo couldn't be conclusively linked to Natalia due to the advanced decomposition of her body. Other developments added weight to the suspicions. Police uncovered online messages between Natalia and Rodrigo. The two had met virtually and agreed to meet in person at the nightclub where she was last seen. This directly contradicted Rodrigo's initial statement, claiming he had never met or spoken with her. Rodrigo and his friends were interviewed again. The group admitted they had partied late into the night and eventually hired a sex worker to join them. They denied any contact with Natalia, but under continued questioning, Rodrigo's story began to crack a day after his second police interview. Rodrigo confessed he admitted that he had met Natalia online and that they had planned to meet at the club. The evening didn't go as expected according to his version. Their conversation soured as the night progressed and dawn approached. Rodrigo offered to take Natalia to another nightclub, but instead, he lured her to a more isolated area in an attempt to be alone with her. Rodrigo claimed that he made unwanted advances toward her, which she rejected. He said he appeared to accept her refusal, but during their time together, Natalia suffered a severe asthma attack. According to his account, she convulsed and collapsed without her inhaler, eventually dying in his car. Panicking and unsure what to do, Rodrigo drove to the nearby woods, tied her body with nylon thread, dragged it deep into the forest, and tried to conceal it beneath tree branches. However, Rodrigo's confession was quickly thrown into question. Forensic evidence later suggested that Natalia had likely died from strangulation, not an asthma attack. There were also claims that a witness had seen a man and a woman engaging in sexual activity near that forested area around the time she went missing. This led investigators to suspect that Rodrigo had left out critical, possibly incriminating details, including potential sexual assault, though his friends were released due to lack of involvement. Rodrigo was formally charged with the murder of Natalia Martinez. At first, it appeared to be an open and shut case. Rodrigo's confession matched key details only the killer would know, including the remote location where Natalia's body was found. Prosecutors were confident they could secure a conviction, but in mid-2010, as preliminary hearings began, Rodrigo suddenly recanted his confession. He alleged that it had been coerced by police and that he was innocent. His defense attorneys backed this claim, presenting Rodrigo's phone, location data, and an employer's statement showing he had worked a regular shift the night Natalia went missing. They also said he had attended a wedding the following day and exhibited no unusual behavior. Worked to disprove this new version of events. On September 2, 2010, Leonardo Rakovin, the bookstore owner, who had initially been a suspect in the case, testified that he had argued with Rodrigo at the nightclub that night. Placing Rodrigo at the scene, Natalia's friends also confirmed that Rodrigo had been at the club. Forensic experts further discredited his asthma attack claim. According to them, while Natalia may have had an attack, it wouldn't have led to such a rapid death. The faint marks of strangulation on her neck were more consistent with homicide between August and September 2010. Prosecutors pieced together a compelling narrative of premeditated murder. Rodrigo Burgess was convicted and sentenced to 9 years in prison for the killing of Natalia Martinez. However, the legal battle didn't end there. In early 2011, Rodrigo's defense filed an appeal, arguing that the conviction lacked direct evidence. No one had witnessed the murder, and the body was too decomposed for a definitive cause of death. The confession, they said, had been unlawfully extracted. Natalia's family was devastated not only by her murder, but by the judicial outcome. They felt Rodrigo's sentence was too lenient. Her father, Ever Martinez, had fallen into deep depression during the investigation, and media firestorm rumors, falsely linking Natalia to drugs and criminal circles, had tormented the family in despair. Ever tragically took his own life. His wife and daughter Claudia found him at home. The emotional toll too much to bear. The family filed a civil suit against Rodrigo, arguing that his actions indirectly caused Ever Martinez's suicide. They initially sought $15,000 in damages. Eventually, Both parties settled for $7,000. The judge rejected a longer prison term. Then came a final twist on October 27, 2014. After serving just 4 years and 2 months, Rodrigo Vegas, 29 years old, was officially pardoned. He walked free. Despite having confessed to the crime and been found guilty in court, the family of Natalia Martinez was left shattered once again, feeling as though justice had not only been delayed, but ultimately denied. Sandra Miles was born on May 26, 1949, in the peaceful little town of Harn, Kansas. She grew up in a close-knit family, especially bonded to her sister. They walked to school together, shared secrets, and remained inseparable throughout their youth. After high school, Sandra followed what she thought was the path to a happy life, settling down with her boyfriend and starting a family. The couple married and soon welcomed a son named Chad. But the marriage didn't last. Sandra quickly realized her husband wasn't the man she had hoped he would be. After the divorce, she tried again to find love, but that relationship too ended in heartbreak. In 1976, Sandra, now a single mother, moved to Hutchinson, a larger city. For work, she got a job at a factory that manufactured pumps and pistons for industrial machines. The job was demanding, but Sandra thrived. Her work ethic earned her the respect of her colleagues and supervisors alike. It was during this chapter of her life that she met Jerry Miles, her third husband. Their chemistry was instant, and before long, their friendship turned into love. They married quickly. The following year, Sandra gave birth to her second child, a daughter named Tracy. For Sandra, Tracy brought renewed hope and a deep sense of fulfillment. She had always dreamed of raising a large, loving family, and for a while, it seemed like she was finally living that dream. To those on the outside, Sandra and Jerry appeared to have the perfect life. Jerry was active in his children's lives and especially loved spending time with little Tracy. The family often visited the nearby lake and cherished their moments together. But behind the smiles and Sunday gatherings, there was a problem, a secret Sandra kept hidden. For years, Jerry struggled with alcoholism. At first, Sandra believed he could manage it, but over time, the drinking spiraled. His relapses became more frequent. He changed when he drank, becoming someone she no longer recognized. After 7 long years, Sandra made a painful decision. She ended the marriage and chose to raise her children alone. Despite the heartbreak, she remained kind in how she spoke of Jerry, saying he was a good man, just one who couldn't overcome his demons. Sandra continued working full-time at the factory to support her children. Though exhausted, she refused to give up. Her quiet strength became the foundation for her family. She spent every spare moment with Tracy and never stopped striving to give her daughter a better life. Chad, now an adult, had moved out and was starting his own life. Tracy, on the other hand, remained at home and was entering her teenage years, a time filled with changes, rebellion, and emotional distance. By the spring of 1997, Tracy was 16 and their once close bond began to frail. Like many teens, Tracy had begun dating, and with that came the turbulence of first love and growing independence. Sandra, shaped by her own past failures in relationships, tried to guide Tracy, but her advice often came off as warnings, something Tracy didn't want to hear. In an effort to reconnect, Sandra surprised her daughter with something Tracy had long wanted, a sleek black moon car. Tracy was thrilled. She loved the car and proudly showed it off at school. For a moment, it seemed their relationship was healing. Sandra was hopeful, but fate, as it often does, had cruel intentions. On March 20th, 1997, Sandra's son Chad came to visit with his girlfriend, Mindy. They brought exciting news. Mindy was pregnant. Sandra was overjoyed. She was going to be a grandmother, and she couldn't wait to meet her grandson. That moment would never come. Days passed. Sandra stopped showing up at work. Her boss tried calling her, no answer. 5 days later, deeply concerned, he contacted Sandra's sister, Pat Douglas Butler. Pat hadn't spoken to Sandra in several days, which wasn't too unusual. They didn't talk daily, but something didn't sit right. Pat and her husband decided to check on Sandra themselves. When they arrived at her home, the door was locked, the house was quiet, lifeless even more concerning. Tracy, who was usually out and about, was nowhere to be found. Pat and her husband went to Tracy's school, hoping she was there, but the teachers hadn't seen her either. Tracy had been absent for several days. Panic set, and Pat contacted the police and filed a missing persons report for both Sandra and Tracy when officers arrived. Pat handed them a spare key. As soon as they stepped inside, they were hit by a strong, unmistakable odor. The smell of decomposition. What they would find inside the house would leave the entire community shaken, recognizing the importance of preserving the crime scene and protecting potential evidence. The responding officers immediately called for backup when additional units arrived. They made a gruesome discovery. The decomposing body of a woman was found lying on her bed, covered by a blanket. Upon removing the blanket, they found a power cord from a household appliance tightly wrapped around her neck, suggesting she had been strangled. The woman's face and head bore multiple visible injuries due to the extent of decomposition. Investigators were unable to determine exactly how many times she had been struck or what weapon had been used, but it was clear that her death had not been natural. This was a brutal and deliberate homicide. Dental records would later confirm the victim's identity, 48-year-old Sandra Miles. However, her daughter Tracy was nowhere to be found. Detectives initially feared that Tracy might also be a victim, perhaps killed and hidden elsewhere in the house, but after a thorough search, there was no trace of her. There were no signs of a struggle involving Tracy, no blood, and no indication she had been harmed like her mother. That led to a far more chilling possibility. Tracy hadn't been murdered. She had been taken. She was officially listed as a missing person, and an urgent search was launched. Who would want to hurt Sandra? A devoted mother who had worked tirelessly to give her children a better future. Who could have hated her enough to do this? Detective Hutchinson took the lead on the case and began looking into Sandra's background, interviewing her neighbors, friends, and ex-husbands, her family including her sister, her son, Chad, and even her ex-husband were informed of the tragedy. None of them could comprehend what had happened. Sandra was well-liked, hardworking, and peaceful. She had no known enemies. Chad made a heartfelt public plea in the local newspaper, asking the community to come forward with any information that might help locate his younger sister. The only family he had left. The forensic autopsy painted a horrifying picture of Sandra's final moments. She had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to the head, likely from a heavy object. The impact knocked her unconscious while she was incapacitated. The killer used a power cord to strangle her. The medical examiner found extensive bruising and internal trauma, indicating a violent and prolonged attack. Investigators suspected there had been more than one attacker, and initially considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. Maybe Sandra had surprised the intruders and been killed in the struggle, but this theory quickly fell apart. There was no forced entry, and no sign of a struggle at the door. Nothing valuable was taken from the house except Tracy's prized possession, her Black Moon car. And the nature of the violence didn't fit a simple burglary. A thief wouldn't take the time to strangle someone. They'd flee or use a gun. This level of brutality suggested rage. It wasn't panic, was personal. Detectives then explored the idea of a deranged individual committing a random act of violence, but again, that didn't align with the evidence. This crime had been carried out by more than one person. Most troubling of all was the fact that Tracy's whereabouts were still unknown. Investigators feared she had been taken against her will by the same people who murdered her mother, and the clock was ticking. The lack of forced entry led detectives to believe that Sandra had willingly let her attackers into the house. She likely knew them. The investigation widened. Police re-interviewed family members, co-workers, friends, and neighbors. They took a hard look at her ex, wondering if resentment or jealousy had played a role. Sandra's third husband, Jerry, an alcoholic whose behavior had worsened after their divorce, became a person of interest, but Jerry had a verifiable alibi and was quickly ruled out. Detectives pressed on Sandra's sister. Pat shared that she had last seen Sandra 5 days before the discovery. Her Around the same time Tracy was last seen at school, the investigation stalled until a break came from the neighborhood. The quiet, close-knit community was shaken. Word of the murder spread fast, and a crowd gathered outside Sandra's home, prompting police to secure the area amidst the crowd. One neighbor stepped forward with valuable information. He lived directly across the street and remembered seeing Tracy 5 days earlier, on March 25th. He said she had been with 2 young men. The 3 of them got into a car and drove off. That single tip changed everything. The young men were quickly identified as Mark and Jay, teenagers who lived nearby. When police went to question them, they spotted a red car in the distance, but when Mark saw the officers approaching, he panicked. He jumped into the vehicle and sped off at high speed. This sudden flight raised immediate red flags. One of the detectives quickly alerted a nearby patrol car to intercept him. Whatever Mark was hiding, he clearly didn't want the police to find out. Mark wouldn't have fled so quickly if he had nothing to hide. Fortunately, police caught up with him just a few kilometers from his home. Inside the vehicle was his friend, both young men visibly shaken by the recent tragedy at Sandra Miles's house. They claimed their erratic behavior was simply fear, nothing more, but seasoned detectives sensed there was more beneath the surface. Both were taken to the station for questioning. During interrogation, the 2 insisted they were innocent, merely frightened by the unfolding events. Their stories aligned well, and with no physical evidence linking them to the crime, they were eventually released. Still, they became persons of interest, potential witnesses to what had happened. The investigation soon took a sharper turn. Detectives were aware that Tracy had recently ended a relationship with a young man named Jeremy Bell, someone her mother, Sandra, strongly disapproved of. Sandra believed Jeremy was a bad influence and had urged her daughter to stay away from him. That tension eventually led Tracy to break things off and begin seeing someone new. Paul Nelson. Witnesses said that shortly before Sandra's murder, Tracy and her mother had a serious argument, fueled by Sandra's disapproval of both Jeremy and Paul. Detectives began interviewing friends and acquaintances from Tracy's social circle. They quickly discovered that Jeremy had a volatile personality. He had even threatened Paul. Though their breakup had been more about Sandra's objections than Paul himself, the relationship between Sandra and Jeremy had always been tense. In fact, it had gotten so serious that Sandra sought a restraining order against him. Jeremy blamed Sandra for ruining his relationship with Tracy and had reportedly made verbal threats during parties, especially when drinking. He frequently ranted about Sandra to his friends, but although he expressed anger, there was no evidence he had ever acted on his threats. Jeremy was already on law enforcement's radar for various prior offenses, and the restraining order only added fuel to the fire. Police began to fear the worst, that Jeremy may have killed Sandra in a fit of rage and possibly kidnapped Tracy. They needed answers fast. Detectives soon learned that Jeremy and his friend, William Lennon, had been arrested on April 1st, just days before Sandra's murder for burglary. That meant Jeremy had been in jail during the time Sandra was killed. He couldn't have been the one to commit the murder. That left one terrifying possibility. The killer was still out there, and Tracy might be in grave danger, with no ransom or contact from the kidnapper. Police feared Tracy might already be dead, but there was still hope she was alive, being held somewhere against her will. Time was critical. When detectives interviewed Jeremy in jail, he confirmed he hadn't been in a relationship with Tracy at the time of Sandra's death, citing the court-mandated restraining order. According to him, their breakup had been final. Tracy had since started dating Paul Nelson's, someone Jeremy despised. He accused Paul of dragging Tracy into dangerous circles and potentially introducing her to drugs. However, Jeremy claimed he no longer held ill feelings toward Sandra. In fact, once Tracy started seeing Paul, Sandra began focusing her disapproval on Paul instead, and Jeremy said they had grown somewhat less antagonistic. On March 25th, the day before Sandra's death, Jeremy reportedly warned Tracy about Paul, calling him dangerous by now. The autopsy was complete. Sandra had been killed on March 26th. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be for stab wounds and significant blunt force trauma to her head. Strangulation had also been used to ensure she didn't survive. It was a brutal, premeditated murder now. Police urgently needed to find Paul Nelson, but he had vanished. His parents told detectives they hadn't seen him since March 26th, the same day Sandra was murdered. Given the timeline, detectives considered Paul their prime suspect. Not only had he gone missing, but so had Tracy. Investigators learned that Paul had been staying with a friend named Swickle before disappearing. When detectives interviewed Swickle, they uncovered crucial information. He confirmed Sandra strongly disapproved of Paul, believing he was a bad influence despite Sandra's opposition. Paul and Tracy continued seeing each other in secret. Eventually, Sandra found out and confronted Tracy. She told her daughter that dating a drug user was a mistake and warned her there would be consequences. Their relationship deteriorated further when Sandra pressured Tracy to end her pregnancy. Tracy consented, but the emotional toll was heavy. Things escalated when Sandra threatened to take away her daughter's car if she didn't break up with Paul. This clash may have triggered Paul's resentment toward Sandra's. Swickle reported that on the morning of March 26th, just hours after Sandra's estimated time of death, Paul returned home around 10 o'clock a.m. Visibly anxious, he began packing quickly, telling Swickle that he and Tracy were leaving town. He claimed they had $2,000 and intended to flee in Tracy's car. Swickle asked where the money had come from, and Paul replied that he had sold Sandra's tape recorder at a pawn shop. That tape recorder would soon become key evidence. Paul and his girlfriend Tracy fled so suddenly, it raised immediate suspicions. If they had nothing to hide, why run? Fortunately, police caught up with them just a few kilometers from Paul's house. He was driving with a friend who seemed anxious about the tragic events that had unfolded at Sandra's home. The two young men claimed their strange behavior stemmed from fear alone, but seasoned detectives weren't convinced. Their instincts told them something was being concealed. Both were taken into custody for questioning during interrogation. The pair stuck to their story. They were merely spooked by the news since there was no concrete evidence linking them to the crime. They were eventually released, but detectives kept their eyes on them, especially because of what they already knew about Tracy's personal life. Tracy had recently ended a turbulent relationship with a young man named Jeremy Bell. Her mother Sandra had strongly disapproved of Jeremy, fearing he would negatively influence her daughter's future. Sandra's pressure ultimately led Tracy to break up with him and start dating someone else. Paul Nelson friends and witnesses told police that Sandra didn't approve of Paul either, which led to several explosive arguments between mother and daughter around this same time. Jeremy, who was known for his volatile behavior, had allegedly made threats against Paul. The situation escalated when Sandra, fearing for Tracy's safety, obtained a restraining order against Jeremy. Jeremy believed Sandra had destroyed his relationship and frequently expressed how much he hated her, especially when he was drinking. Despite these outbursts, he never physically acted on his threats. Police initially feared that Jeremy, angry and bitter, might have retaliated by killing Sandra and kidnapping Tracy, but when detectives learned that Jeremy had been arrested on burglary charges just days before the murder and was in jail during the time Sandra was killed, that theory was ruled out. Still, the case took a darker turn. Tracy was missing, and there had been no ransom demands. Authorities feared she might be dead, though they held out hope she was being held somewhere against her will. When police interviewed Jeremy in prison, he was quick to point fingers at Paul Nelson. Jeremy admitted he didn't like Paul and believed he was leading Tracy down a destructive path, possibly even into drug use. But he claimed that his own relationship with Sandra had improved after Tracy left him for Paul. He said Sandra had redirected her anger toward Paul, and in a strange twist, he and Sandra had become allies of sorts. March 25th, just one day before the murder, Jeremy recalled warning Tracy that Paul was dangerous. Soon after the autopsy report was completed, it confirmed Sandra died on March 26th from 4 stab wounds, blunt force trauma to the head, and strangulation, likely to ensure she was dead. The brutality shocked investigators. Their prime suspect, Paul Nelson, But Paul had disappeared. His parents reported him missing the same day as Sandra's murder. Now both Paul and Tracy were off the grid, and the urgency to find them grew. Investigators discovered Paul had been living with a friend named Zwickle before going into hiding when questioned. Zwickle offered crucial insights. He confirmed that Sandra disapproved of Paul and had repeatedly told Tracy he was a dangerous influence despite Sandra's objections. The young couple had continued seeing each other in secret eventually. Sandra found out and confronted Tracy, urging her to leave Paul when Tracy resisted. Sandra dropped a bombshell if Tracy wanted to start a family. She should just move in with Paul. It was a challenge, not a blessing, and both teens were unprepared. Sandra even suggested Tracy consider ending her pregnancy. Tracy agreed, but afterward, the relationship between mother and daughter deteriorated. Further tensions boiled over when Sandra threatened to take away Tracy's car keys unless she broke up with Paul. Tracy saw her mother as an obstacle. Zwickle remembered the morning of March 26th vividly. Paul had returned home around 10 a.m. and quickly began packing. He said he and Tracy were leaving and had about $2,000 more than enough, he thought, to start a new life. He never mentioned Sandra's death when Zwickle asked about the money. Paul claimed he'd sold Sandra's tape recorder at a pawn shop, but this made little sense. It fetched less than $50. Something didn't add up. Later that day, Zwickle watched as Paul and Tracy drove off together. Calm and collected, they appeared to be heading to Mexico. Authorities quickly placed both on a nationwide wanted list. Detectives were alarmed when they examined Sandra's bank records. On the same day she was murdered, Tracy had withdrawn a large sum of money from her mother's account at the bank. She and Paul cashed a check, with Tracy claiming her mother had given her the money to buy a Cara. Teller reported that neither appeared distressed or out of place, raising new questions. Had Tracy really been kidnapped? Or was she a willing accomplice? Police turned to Tracy's best friend, Candace Kino. For answers, Candace revealed that Tracy had called her on March 25th. Upset and angry, she said her mother had taken her car keys and threatened to kick her out. Tracy admitted she planned to run away with Paul. With that, the theory of Tracy as a hostage fell apart eventually. It was confirmed that Tracy and Paul had crossed into Mexico, but for reasons still unclear. They returned to the U.S. days later, re-entering near El Paso, Texas on April 8th. Candace received a phone call from Tracy and immediately contacted investigators using the number Tracy had called from. Detectives located the couple on the outskirts of El Paso. Both were arrested the same day during interrogation. Paul appeared shaken. He kept his eyes on the ground and trembled. He admitted to being at Sandra's house on the night of March 25th. He and Tracy had planned to escape, and it was Tracy, Paul claimed, who suggested killing Sandra so she could never stop them the next morning. Tracy left for school with Candace, while Paul stayed behind, hiding in the house with a tree branch he intended to use as a weapon. He said he only wanted to knock Sandra unconscious, not kill her, but police doubted his story. Why sneak in and ambush her if he didn't intend murder? According to Paul, Sandra was shocked to find him there. She started yelling and insulting him, and in a fit of rage, he strangled her with a cord. Once she stopped breathing, he covered her body with a blanket and fled. Tracy, meanwhile, gave her own statement in the next room. Calm, even smiling, she claimed that while she and Paul had planned the murder together, only he committed the act. She denied any direct involvement. She also told police where to find the murder weapon, wooden figurine used to bludgeon Sandra. Police later recovered it from the backyard, stained with Sandra's blood, with overwhelming evidence. Prosecutors charged both with first-degree murder. The penalty, life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Defense team tried to shift blame. Paul's lawyer argued he had been manipulated by Tracy and should be convicted of manslaughter. Tracy's lawyer countered that Paul was the true instigator and killer, while she merely played a secondary role. The trial began on February 26, 1999. Throughout the proceedings, Paul and Tracy displayed shocking disrespects, murking, laughing, even mocking the courtroom. Tracy refused to speak with her grieving family. Her brother Chad had desperately wanted answers, but she gave him none. On April 22, 1999, the court handed down its verdict. Life imprisonment for both Tracy Miles and Paul Nelson. They would be eligible for parole only after serving 25 years as the judge announced the sentence. Paul made an obscene gesture. Neither expressed any remorse, though they may one day petition for early release. Sandra's family continues to hope that day never comes. Coming up next, we'll examine another chilling tale of betrayal and murder, the case of Greg Mulvihill and Diana Lovejoy. A love story turned deadly. Fibromyalgia had taken a heavy toll on Diana Lovejoy's life. She suffered from constant muscle pain, chronic fatigue, and a deep exhaustion that limited her energy and disrupted her daily routines. Eventually, the illness forced Diana to leave her job and focus solely on managing her symptoms. She spent more time at home in Carlsbad, California, adjusting to a new lifestyle that was a far cry from the energetic, athletic one she once knew. More than anything, Diana longed to be a mother, to love, nurture, and raise a child with confidence and joy. She and her husband Greg Mulvihill had tried for years to conceive, but after suffering multiple miscarriages, Diana was left heartbroken. The losses impacted her deeply, both physically and emotionally. Though she had no children at the time, she poured her love into her two cats, Lanny and Turtle. When Turtle fell ill and eventually passed away, Diana was devastated to comfort her. Greg surprised her with a kitten, Taffy. The gesture brought Diana a sense of peace in an otherwise turbulent time. Then, in an unexpected twist, Diana discovered she was pregnant after years of heartache and failed attempts. It finally happened. Greg was thrilled, and Diana was overwhelmed with joy. Her dream of becoming a mother was finally coming true. In September 2012, the couple welcomed the baby boy. Greg took time off work to bond with his newborn son, cherishing every moment. Diana, however, was consumed with worry about her son's health. She feared he might suffer from the same chronic pain and fatigue she experienced. Despite Greg's reassurances that their son was healthy, Diana became increasingly convinced something was wrong. She began researching treatments obsessively and discovered a medication called guaifenesin, similar to Mucinex. Some online sources suggested it might help with fibromyalgia symptoms. Diana was determined to administer the drug to her young son in high doses, but Greg was adamantly against it, believing it was unnecessary and potentially dangerous. This disagreement only deepened the growing rift between them. Their marriage continued to unravel. After Greg suffered a debilitating shoulder injury, he had to quit his job with their finances strained. Diana took a job in sales to keep the household afloat. The couple also tried filming online cooking videos together, Diana on camera, Greg behind it, but the venture failed to gain traction. Diana even appeared in ads for kitty litter, but none of these efforts brought in much income. By 2014, the couple was constantly at odds, especially over their son's health. Diana confided in coworkers, claiming Greg was unsupportive and unhelpful. Then, in July of that year, things took a dark turn. Greg was approached by a police officer who informed him that Diana had filed multiple reports accusing him of domestic abuse. Diana alleged that Greg had assaulted her while she was asleep under the influence of sedatives and had inappropriately touched her without consent. Even more disturbingly, she accused Greg of sexually abusing their child. Protective services got involved. Greg vehemently denied all the accusations and claimed Diana was retaliating because of their disagreements over parenting. In response, he filed for divorce and requested custody of their child. After a thorough investigation, authorities found no evidence to support Diana's claims. Psychiatric evaluations of both Greg and their son showed no signs of abuse. The judge dropped the case and awarded the couple joint custody for days. It was a decision that Diana found deeply upsetting. She appeared to accept the new arrangement and focused on being a devoted mother. As part of the divorce settlement, Diana remained in the family home and agreed to buy out Greg's share of the property. By 2016, they had reached a fragile peace with a civil co-parenting routine. that gave both parents equal access to their son, but that peace was shattered on the night of September 1st, 2016. That evening, the Carlsbad Police Department received a chilling 911 call. Jason Kovach, a friend of Greg's, reported that Greg had been shot multiple times and was bleeding heavily. Officers responded immediately, finding Jason and Greg on the side of the road. Jason explained that the shooting had taken place about half a mile away. The officer, realizing an ambulance might not arrive in time, rushed Greg to the hospital in his patrol car while Greg fought for his life in surgery. Detectives sat down with Jason to unravel what had happened. According to Jason, earlier that day, Greg had received a call from a man claiming to be a private investigator. The caller said he had crucial documents related to Greg's custody battle. In divorce, he gave Greg a specific time and location to meet but didn't leave his name. Greg was wary but curious. He asked Jason to come along for backup, and the two prepared, cautiously bringing only a flashlight and a child's baseball bat that night. They arrived at the meeting location, a remote area shrouded in darkness due to the new moon. The only light came from a faint sliver in the sky. Greg followed the caller's instructions to locate a package allegedly taped to an electric pole. As he approached, scanning the area with his flashlight, he suddenly shouted on. Then came the gunfire. Gunshots pierced the silence. Greg collapsed, severely wounded, while Jason, shocked and helpless, called 911. The question now was, who had lured Greg into a trap and why? What investigators would soon uncover was a twisted murder-for-hire plot involving deception, betrayal, and a desperate attempt to settle a score by any means necessary. Romuel had taken a significant toll on Diana's life, bringing with it constant muscle pain, unrelenting fatigue, and little energy to spare. The illness made it increasingly difficult for her to maintain employment, and eventually, Diana stepped away from her career to focus on managing her health. She spent more time at home in Carlsbad, California, but despite the challenges, Diana's greatest dream remained unchanged. She wanted to be a mother. She longed to love, raise, and nurture a child into someone strong and confident. For years, she and her husband Greg had tried to start a family, but Diana tragically suffered multiple miscarriages. The emotional and physical toll was immense. Though she had no children at the time, Diana devoted her maternal love to her two cats, Lanny and Turtle. But when Turtle fell ill and passed away, her grief was overwhelming. To comfort her, Greg surprised Diana with a kitten she named Taffy, a small gesture that brought her enormous joy. Then, in a surprising and hopeful turn of events, Diana became pregnant after years of heartbreak. She and Greg were finally expecting a child in September 2012. Diana gave birth to a baby boy. Greg took time off work to bond with their newborn, cherishing every moment of fatherhood. Diana, meanwhile, was constantly anxious about their son's health. She feared he might have inherited her fibromyalgia. Greg, however, believed their son was healthy and felt Diana's concerns were excessive, but Diana remained convinced something was wrong. She began researching possible treatments and came across a drug called guaifenesin, similar to Mucinex, commonly used to treat chest infections. Some believed it could also alleviate fibromyalgia symptoms. Diana wanted to give her son high doses of the medication, but Greg was firmly against it. He worried it was both unnecessary and dangerous. This disagreement sparked increasing tension in their marriage. Their problems worsened when Greg suffered a shoulder injury that forced him to quit his job. Diana took a sales job to keep them afloat and also began making online cooking videos. Greg helped with the filming, but their efforts didn't pay off financially. She even tried appearing in promotional videos for kitty litter, but again, success was limited. By the time their son was 2, the couple's arguments, especially about their child's health, had become constant. Diana confided in coworkers, saying Greg was unsupportive and unhelpful. Then, in July 2014, things took a disturbing turn. Greg was approached by a police officer and questioned about allegations Diana had made against him. She had filed multiple reports accusing him of abuse, leading to Greg being removed from the home. Diana and her son were allowed to stay, she claimed. Greg had assaulted her while she was asleep. She said she was under the effects of drowsy medication when she woke to find Greg touching her inappropriately. Diana also accused Greg of sexually abusing their son. These serious allegations prompted investigations by local authorities and Child Protective Services. Greg denied all of it. He insisted Diana was making false claims in retaliation for their disagreement over their son's health. A full investigation, including psychiatric evaluations, found no evidence of abuse. Eventually, the case was dropped, and the judge granted Greg 50/50 custody. Despite the outcome, Diana remained focused on being a devoted mother. She stayed in the house as part of the divorce settlement and agreed to buy out Greg's share of the property. By 2016, the former couple had settled into a tense but functional co-parenting arrangement. But that fragile peace was shattered on September 1, 2016. The Carlsbad Police Department received a chilling 911 call. Jason Kovecha, friend of Greg's, reported that Greg had been shot multiple times and was bleeding heavily. Officers responded immediately and found Greg and Jason on the side of a remote road. Jason explained that the shooting had taken place about half a mile away, realizing Greg's life was in danger. The officer decided not to wait for paramedics and rushed him to the hospital himself. Meanwhile, the SWAT team launched a manhunt, but no suspect was found at the hospital. Greg underwent emergency surgery for a gunshot wound to the chest. He was placed on life support while he fought for his life. Detectives interviewed Jason. Jason revealed that Greg had received a call from a private investigator offering crucial documents related to the divorce and custody case. The man didn't give a name, but arranged a late-night meeting at a remote location. Greg, though skeptical, was curious and brought Jason along. They armed themselves with a flashlight and a child's baseball bat for protection. The location was nearly pitch black due to a new moon. The only light came from a small sliver in the sky. When they arrived, Greg spotted a package attached to an electrical pole. As he approached it, he suddenly shouted on. Gunfire erupted. Jason and Greg ran for their lives as bullets whizzed past them. When they finally reached their car, Jason realized Greg had been hit and called 911. Jason couldn't provide a detailed description of the shooter, but he led detectives back to the scene. Near the electrical pole, investigators found a peculiar clue: a neatly folded Angry Birds towel. It appeared to be deliberately placed as a distraction. They also noticed a strong odor of feces nearby and found a pile next to a used towel. It looked like someone had defecated and tried to clean up. Both samples were carefully collected and sent to the crime lab. DNA testing would take weeks. In the meantime, detectives began looking into Greg's past. Diana Lovejoy quickly became a person of interest when questioned. Diana denied any involvement and claimed she was home with her son at the time of the attack. But when Greg awoke from life support and was interviewed, he didn't rule out her involvement, though. He doubted she could resort to violence. He acknowledged their bitter history. The detectives traced the phone used to lure Greg to a pay-as-you-go plan purchased at a local Best Buy. Surveillance footage from the store revealed Diana herself buying the phone. When confronted, Diana admitted to the purchase. She claimed she feared Greg and had recently bought a gun and taken shooting lessons at Iron Sights, where she met her instructor, Weldon McDavid, a former Marine and weapons expert. Diana told police that her relationship with Weldon had become romantic. She said he offered to help scare Greg into backing off. She claimed she never asked him to hurt anyone, only to intimidate Greg into stopping what she called harassment. Weldon instructed her to buy the phone and lured Greg to the remote spot. Diana drove him there and picked him up afterward. But when she heard sirens, Weldon allegedly told her he had to shoot Greg in self-defense because Greg had made an aggressive move. Weldon was arrested shortly after. During questioning, he claimed he was home at the time of the shooting, but when asked for a DNA sample, he became nervous. Detectives pressed him, and he admitted he had stopped on a dirt road the night before. To relieve himself, a search warrant executed at his home uncovered a rifle, a live round, and 6 spent shell casings matching the number of shots. Jason had reported hearing forensic analysis confirmed that the shell casings were fired from Weldon's weapon. Diana's computer also revealed incriminating search history. She had looked up information about new moons, like the one that night, suggesting she timed the attack to happen under cover of darkness. The evidence painted a chilling picture. Diana and Weldon had planned the ambush with careful precision. Diana had a motive. She owed Greg $120,000 in the divorce, and removing him would erase her obligation. Prosecutors believed she chose murder over money. Their trial began in October 2017. Weldon claimed he never meant to kill Greg, only to scare him, but the prosecution argued otherwise. They contended that Weldon, an expert marksman, only failed to kill Greg because Greg's flashlight disoriented him at the last moment. The jury found both Diana Lovejoy and Weldon McDavid guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. Upon hearing the verdict, Diana collapsed. Though many believed she was faking it, Weldon was sentenced to 50 years to life. Diana received 26 years to life. Both continued to maintain their innocence. Bianca Roberson's future was bright. Born on October 17, 1998. She was a remarkable young woman, an honor student at Bayard Rustin High School, who had just earned a 4-year merit scholarship to Jacksonville University in Florida. Her dream: to become a forensic agent with the FBI. She was talented and driven, a cheerleader, a Girl Scout, a basketball player. She played multiple instruments: flute, violin, clarinet, and guitar, and even expressed herself through art. But beyond her accomplishments, Bianca was deeply compassionate, known for putting others before herself. On June 28, 2017, Bianca was preparing for the next chapter of her life. That day, she went shopping with her mother and grandmother at a local Walmart, gathering supplies for her upcoming move to Florida. As she drove home, just 10 minutes after leaving the Walmart parking lot, something unimaginable happened. Cut to scene: a frantic 911 call, screeching tires, sirens, witnesses called, emergency services. After a car was seen veering off the road and crashing, first responders arrived quickly. But tragically, Bianca was pronounced dead at the scene. She had suffered severe head trauma, and at first, authorities believed she had lost control of her car accident. It seemed, but something wasn't right. Police began speaking to witnesses, and a chilling detail emerged. Bianca's car had been traveling alongside a red pickup truck. Before the crash, one witness claimed the two vehicles may have collided just as the lanes were merging. The red truck didn't stop, it sped off back at home. Bianca's grandmother was growing worried. Traffic was unusually heavy. It wasn't until she arrived home that 2 officers appeared at her door with the devastating news: Bianca had been killed in the crash. Pause, cut to emotional recollection for her mother, Michelle. The loss was unbearable. Bianca wasn't just her daughter, she was her best friend, and heartbreakingly, Bianca's death came just 4 years after Michelle had lost her son, 22-year-old Malik James Rowley, to a heart condition and just existing. Michelle would later say, "My children were my reason for getting up in the morning. Now I feel like a mother without children." Even Bianca's father, Rodney, who had divorced Michelle in 2006, was shattered despite their separation. They had co-parented amicably thanks largely to Bianca, who didn't like it when her parents argued. She'd correct me. Rodney admitted she was the glue. Bianca was loved by everyone. She wasn't spoiled, Michelle said, but deeply cherished and willing to work hard. From her first job at McDonald's at 15 to her time as a dietary aide at White Horse Village retirement community, she touched lives everywhere she went. After her death, the family received countless letters from elderly residents, recalling her kindness and warmth. Shift to investigation details. Tone grows darker, more suspenseful at first. The crash seemed like a tragic accident, but when the autopsy results came in, the truth was far more disturbing. A bullet was found lodged in Bianca's skull. Her death wasn't the result of a collision or head trauma from the crash, it was a homicide. Bianca Robeson had been shot in the head, while Dryden detectives had to revisit every assumption. They began scouring surveillance footage, hoping to identify the red pickup truck seen near Bianca's car moments before the crash. Unfortunately, no camera captured the exact location where her vehicle left the road. One camera, about a mile away, did capture a red pickup truck driving alongside Bianca's car. As the lanes merged, investigators theorized that road rage may have been the motive. Perhaps neither driver yielded, and a confrontation escalated. What began as a moment of impatience turned into a fatal shooting, but the image of the pickup truck was too blurry to read the license plate. Witnesses hadn't seen the plate either. Bianca's family didn't recognize the truck, and no one from the Walmart parking lot where Bianca had been just minutes earlier appeared to have followed her or acted suspiciously. Investigation grew more urgent. Detectives knew they were racing against time to find the killer. Narration, voice of resolve, compassion. Bianca's death sent shockwaves through the community. A candlelight vigil was held just 2 days after she died, drawing mourners of all ages. Friends, family, and even strangers came to honor a young woman who had touched so many lives. Bianca Robertson was the kind of person who would sneak hungry children into her home to feed them, who asked her mother to stop when she saw a car accident so they could help, and who would invite anyone eating alone to share a meal with her family. That kindness, that light, was stolen in an instant by someone who chose violence over patience, cruelty over compassion. Narrator solemnly, as investigators continued to analyze footage and trace the red truck's movements. They asked the public for help in identifying the vehicle. All they needed was a name, a plate, number, anything Bianca Robeson deserved justice, and justice was coming after Bianca Robeson was shot and her vehicle ran off the road. Investigators turned to the public for help. Media outlets broadcast Bianca's story widely, asking anyone with information about a red pickup truck seen in the area to come forward. Detectives canvassed homes and businesses near the accident site, hoping security cameras had captured anything useful. Their persistence paid off. Roughly 5 minutes after the 911 calls started coming in, one camera caught a red pickup truck passing by. It wasn't definitive, but it was a start. The footage didn't reveal a license plate or a clear view of the driver, and detectives weren't even sure if it was the right vehicle. It could have been a look-alike. But then, 2 days after Bianca's death, a breakthrough came. A woman contacted the police. She believed she had seen the truck authorities were searching for, and even got a glimpse of the driver. She described a red pickup truck overtaking her car before stopping at the intersection near Pottstown Pike. She noticed the driver turn left-hand. More importantly, she saw his face. Her eyewitness account not only narrowed the search area, but confirmed that the vehicle seen in the earlier footage was not the one involved. It had just looked similar. Using her description, a forensic artist sketched the suspect, a white male, roughly 25 to 35 years old, with brown hair and a stubble beard. Police released the sketch to the public, hoping someone might recognize him. Bianca's family was shown the drawing, but no one knew the man. Narrator, somber, reflective tone. As the investigation pressed on, detectives considered the possibility that Bianca's murder may have been racially motivated. They revisited the area near the intersection where the truck was last seen, seeking better surveillance footage. That search led them to a home less than half a mile away. The homeowner's driveway camera had captured clearer footage, but again, the angle didn't provide a plate or a facial ID. Still, police were getting closer. In one of the clearer recordings, they identified distinctive features on the red pickup truck: an easily noticeable sticker on the right side window, a long vertical dent on the passenger side door, and damage to the hood. These details were released to the public, along with a $5,000 reward for any information. Police were confident someone, somewhere, had seen that truck. They were right. Narrator, tone shifts to resolve. Justice. 3 days after Bianca's death, a lawyer contacted authorities. His client, 28, David Desper, of Trainer, Pennsylvania, wanted to turn himself in. The lawyer admitted Desper had been involved in the incident that led to Bianca's death that same day. David surrendered at the West Goshen Police Department. He didn't speak during the initial interrogation, but cooperated in other ways. He revealed where his truck could be found when detectives located it. They immediately recognized the vehicle, the sticker, the dent, the damage. It matched perfectly. Search of his home uncovered the weapon used in the shooting. Narrator, emotional and reflective. David Desper was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, along with other related offenses. The question still haunted everyone. Why? Bianca Roberson had her whole life ahead of her. She had just graduated high school and was headed to Jacksonville University. Her plans were big. Her heart was bigger, and in one senseless act of violence, it was all taken away at her funeral, held at St. Paul's Baptist Church. More than 800 mourners gathered to say goodbye. Friends, teachers, community members, and even the university admissions officer who had helped accept her into college came to pay their respects in a moving eulogy. Pastor Wayne Croft Sr. compared Bianca's killing to two other racially charged tragedies: the deaths of Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis, two black teenagers shot in Florida in 2012. He reminded the crowd that regardless of whether this was road rage or racism, the result was the same: a brilliant young black woman was dead. Narrator, court and aftermath tone, quiet gravity. In September 2018, the case went to trial. David Desper was given a chance to explain his motive, but he didn't. Instead, he looked at Bianca's grieving family and asked for forgiveness. Her parents had spent months dreading the moment they'd face their daughter's killer on the day of the hearing. They arrived in Unity. Family and friends wore t-shirts with Bianca's face. Her father Rodney held a banner reading, "Justice for Bianca Nicole Roberson. We're just trying to be strong," he said, "but I don't know what I'll do when I see him. That man took her dreams away." Her mother Michelle couldn't bring herself to accept the finality. "I want to hold her, comfort her, and bring her back," she cried. The prosecution explained that as Bianca's and Desper's vehicles merged on the highway, neither would give way. That's when David Desper rolled down his window and fired a single, fatal shot, then fled. He left the state, hid the truck with a friend, and considered escaping to Delaware, but as the news spread, as his sketch and the truck's description appeared across every media outlet, the walls closed in. He knew it was over. The district attorney ultimately determined that there wasn't enough evidence to label the murder a hate crime. Investigators found no racist material in Desper's home or social media. Still, many in the community disagreed with that conclusion. To them, this was another example of black lives being devalued. Another dreamer lost to senseless violence. Narrator, concluding reflection before sentencing. Desper's defense team painted him as immature, a big kid who liked cars and panicked. But the prosecution rejected that idea. A 28-year-old man with a loaded gun is not a big kid. The prosecutor said, "He's a grown man who made a choice, a deadly, cowardly choice." In a cruel twist of irony, Desper's own mother, unaware her son was the shooter, had shared a Facebook post seeking justice for Bianca. When the truth came out, she reached out to Bianca's family and apologized. "I'm so sorry for what my son did," she said through tears, as her son wept beside her. The room was filled with grief, not just for a life lost, but for the bright future that would never be. Bianca Roberson was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a young woman whose light continues to shine in the hearts of everyone she touched. Her life mattered. Her story will not be forgotten. Robertson could barely speak through his tears as he faced the man who had killed his daughter. "I have a few simple questions for the defendant," he began, his voice trembling. "Why did you shoot my daughter? Was it because of her youth, her race, her gender, or just because you wanted to go first on the road? Or was it simply because you were having a bad day?" He paused, choked by grief. "All my dreams for Bianca were coming true. Until the day you took her life. Now, all I have left are memories." David Desper pleaded guilty to third-degree murder and was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 as she handed down the sentence. Judge Emery Wheatcraft grew visibly emotional. "I don't believe you were afraid," she said to Desper. "I believe it was anger." She imposed the maximum sentence for the crime, 20 to 40 years. Desper's appeal was later denied. Title card: The Murder of Michelle Young. Let's now examine the haunting case of Michelle Young. Jason Young was born in 1974 in Brevard, North Carolina, raised in an ordinary household. He pursued higher education at a prestigious university in Raleigh. After graduation, he landed a sales job with a major retail chain. Jason was considered a dependable employee, but among friends, he had a different reputation. He was known to be erratic in relationships, often described as a womanizer who drifted from partner to partner. Michelle Young, born in February 1977 in New York, grew up in a close-knit family with her younger sister Meredith and their devoted mother, Linda. Linda played a pivotal role in shaping Michelle's dreams, which included pursuing a career in law and economics. Her academic excellence led her to a top North Carolina university, where she completed her master's degree and went on to secure a high-level job in the county. Michelle met Jason by chance on her birthday. When he accidentally spilled a drink on her, he offered to buy her another, and the two struck up a conversation. As they talked, they discovered they had attended the same university, though Jason had graduated 3 years earlier. That evening marked the beginning of their romantic relationship. Although deeply infatuated, they had no plans to live together or marry. Jason was still living with his parents in Brevard, while Michelle was based in Raleigh. They saw each other mostly on weekends or when Jason traveled for work. But everything changed when Michelle discovered she was pregnant. The news stunned both of them. Neither was ready to start a family still. Michelle decided to keep the baby. Jason, after a month of contemplation, moved to Raleigh. They married not out of love, but largely due to Michelle's lack of health insurance, which made childbirth unaffordable. Marriage solved that problem in the spring of 2004. Their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth, was born. Michelle embraced motherhood with support from her own mother and sister. But Linda quickly sensed something was wrong. Jason had a temper, and arguments were frequent. Though Michelle tried to present a happy front, she confided in her mother that the relationship was rocky. Later that year, the couple bought a large house in a quiet neighborhood. When Michelle became pregnant again, she was nervous to share the news. To her surprise, Jason seemed supportive. They traveled to Brevard to tell his parents in person, and even went out for a celebratory dinner. But tragedy struck on the way back. Jason, who was driving, lost control and crashed into a ravine. Both survived with minor injuries, but Michelle suffered a miscarriage around this time. Jason reconnected with a college acquaintance, ironically, also named Michelle. She was invited to visit their home, and during the visit, she frequently complimented Jason while complaining about her own troubled marriage. Michelle Young wasn't alarmed. If anything, she sympathized with the woman. But Jason and Michelle #2 began calling each other daily and secretly meeting. Jason explained his absences as business trips. Michelle Young remained unaware. In the summer of 2006, Michelle discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Jason's response was cold and distant. Michelle blamed his detachment on the previous miscarriage, never suspecting deeper issues. By November 2006, Michelle was 5 months pregnant. One evening, she had a long phone conversation with her best friend, venting about Jason and a recent fight that night. Jason left on a supposed 300-mile business trip, but rather than resting at his hotel, he inspected entrances, exits, and surveillance cameras, crafting what investigators would later call a fake alibi. The next morning, Jason phoned Meredith. He told her he had ordered a surprise anniversary gift for Michelle, but mistakenly sent the confirmation to their home fax. He asked Meredith to retrieve it before Michelle saw it. Despite her dislike for Jason, Meredith agreed, using a side door only family knew about. Meredith entered her sister's quiet home. Michelle's keys, wallet, and personal items were still in the hallway. She hadn't left upstairs. The bedroom door was open. What Meredith found next was a nightmare. Michelle lay lifeless by the bed, surrounded by blood. The walls, furniture, and carpet were splattered with it. Tiny footprints, those of her daughter. Cassidy marked the floor. Meredith, horrified, called 911, but then she heard a faint sound. From under the bed there, wide-eyed and confused, was little Cassidy, traumatized but unharmed. She had spent hours beside her mother's lifeless body. Forensic analysis revealed Michelle had been beaten brutally. Her skull was fractured, teeth broken, and bones crushed by a blunt object. A bloodied pillow suggested she may have been smothered in her final moments. Michelle's body was found lifeless in her bedroom. A pillow beside her, marked with the chilling evidence of suffocation. Nothing had been stolen from the house, no valuables touched, no electronics missing. It was clear this was not a robbery gone wrong. This was a targeted killing. Even more disturbing, there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows. This led investigators to a troubling realization. The killer either had a key or knew of a hidden entrance, something only a family member would be aware of under normal circumstances. Michelle's husband, Jason, would have been the prime suspect, but he seemed to have a rock-solid alibi. Jason claimed he had checked into a hotel the night of the murder and had never left until the morning, where he then attended a scheduled business meeting. Hotel keycard records confirmed his entry and exit, at least on the surface, but as investigators dug deeper, Jason's story began to unravel. A hotel employee had found the fire escape propped open with a roca, strange detail that raised eyebrows when surveillance footage was reviewed to see who had done it. Investigators discovered the camera had conveniently been disabled the night of the murder. Coincidence? Or deliberate tampering? Even more suspicious, the last activity recorded on Jason's room key was just 30 minutes after he checked in. Then nothing. Thought. Same night, a man closely resembling Jason was spotted at a gas station midway between the hotel and his home. When asked for IDs, required by the store's policy, he refused. He paid with cash, rushed out, and even left without collecting his change. The clerk later positively identified Jason, though he continued to deny ever leaving the hotel room even before the murder. There were signs of something boiling under the surface. The day before Michelle's death, Jason had placed over 24 frantic phone calls to her and 5 more to his mistress, Michelle Money. Each call lasted less than 15 seconds. Investigators believed this suggested panic, and those calls, they were traced to cell towers outside the hotel, directly contradicting his claim of being in his room all night on the morning of his business meeting. Jason arrived late. Colleagues noticed he was distracted and on edge, but none of this was enough to press charges. Not yet. For nearly 3 years, Jason lived freely. In a painful twist, he even won custody of his young daughter, devastating blow to Michelle's grieving family. Then, in 2012, the case was reopened. New witnesses emerged. One neighbor reported seeing Jason's distinctive white car near the family home on the night of the murder. A child psychologist testified that Jason's daughter had been reenacting a disturbing scene with her dolls, one that echoed details of her mother's murder. Michelle Money, Jason's former mistress, took the stand as well, describing his violent temper, mood swings, and confessions of marital trouble together. This new wave of evidence painted a clearer picture of guilt in court. It was enough. Jason was convicted of the brutal assault and murder of his pregnant wife, and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Left behind in the wake of this tragedy was their daughter, Cassidy, now without a mother, and with a father behind bars for the crime. She was placed under the care of her maternal aunt, beginning a new chapter shaped by the consequences of Jason's unthinkable actions. Fade into next story. Transition. Today, we turn to another deeply unsettling case, that of Thomas and Jackie Hawks, a couple whose golden retirement years aboard a beautiful yacht would soon be hijacked by deception and ultimately death. The Hawks were the picture of determination. Thomas and his brother Jim grew up in California, farm country. Spending their youth surfing and sailing, the vast Pacific life took Thomas into the military. He served in Vietnam, then transitioned into work as a probation officer. Jim followed a similar path, becoming a police officer and eventually a police chief. Service, duty, and hard work ran deep in their blood. Thomas remained physically strong well into his later years. His body, a result of disciplined bodybuilding, was a testament to the strength of his character. He had 2 sons, Ryan and Matthew, from a previous marriage. Though that relationship eventually ended, Thomas met Jackie, a woman with a kind soul and a resilient heart. Jackie couldn't have children of her own due to a past accident, but she embraced Thomas's sons as her own. Together, Thomas and Jackie chased their dream of life at sea. They worked tirelessly and eventually bought a 55-foot yacht, which they fittingly named Well Deserved, was their pride and joy. The yacht became their home as they spent 2 years sailing the western coastline, exploring Mexico's tropical shores, the California coast, and the Catalina Islands, but eventually, duty called them back to land. One of Thomas's sons was starting a family of his own, with the promise of a grandchild on the horizon. Thomas and Jackie decided to return to Arizona. They would sell Well Deserved, close the sailing chapter of their lives, and begin a new one surrounded by family. They listed their yacht for $435,000 in a magazine ad, choosing to sell it themselves. To avoid paying broker fees, the first serious inquiry came from a man named Skylar DeLeon. From the start, Thomas Seaver, the ex-probation officer, was skeptical. Skylar was young, flashy, and his wealth didn't quite make sense, but Skylar had an answer. He claimed to have been a former child actor, even appearing in the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers that, combined with investments, had supposedly made him rich to ease the Hawks' doubts. Skylar arrived at the meeting with his pregnant wife, Jennifer Henderson, and their small child, the picture of a perfect family. He offered full cash plus $155,000 for personal items on board his charm, his family, and the cash were enough to gain the Hawks' trust. What they didn't know was that Skylar and Jennifer were hiding a deadly sea trial. A routine part of any boat sale was scheduled for November 15, 2004, but just days before, on November 12th, Thomas and Jackie went on what would unknowingly be their final voyage. A bittersweet farewell was planned. One final voyage aboard their beloved yacht before handing it over to the new buyer. Tom and Jackie Hawks were saying goodbye, not just to a boat, but 2 years of cherished memories on the open sea. On November 15th, beneath the golden California sun, they arrived at the marina near Santa Catalina Island. With them were 2 unfamiliar men, one muscular, the other slender. The presence of these strangers raised eyebrows, but Tom was reassured when they introduced themselves as acquaintances. The muscular one, they said, was just an accountant. Jennifer Hawks and her young son stayed behind on shore while Tom, Jackie, and the 2 men boarded the yacht and headed into open waters. It was meant to be a routine sea trial, a final test run before the sail, but as the vessel faded over the horizon, no one could have known that it would be the last time Tom and Jackie would ever be seen alive that evening. Carter Ford, a close friend of the Hawks and port captain at the Newport Beach Yacht Club, was expecting them back. They had made plans to meet after the trial, but night fell, and no word came. Hours passed. Then a chilling call from Jackie's family shattered the calm. The Hawks hadn't returned, and their phones had gone silent the next morning. The yacht mysteriously reappeared docked, abandoned, but eerily clean. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, just silence. Jackie's SUV was also gone, deepening the mystery. Had the couple decided to leave, to vanish without a trace, or had something darker occurred? A white towel was found ominously hanging from a porthole, and upon entering the cabin, investigators discovered another towel. This one stained with ink, and tucked between the bed and wall nearby was a receipt for bleach, heavy-duty trash, bags, cleaning supplies, and a bottle of Tums. As detectives pieced together this grim puzzle, suspicion quickly turned to the yacht's buyers, Skylar DeLeon and his wife, Jennifer. On the surface they seemed like an average couple. Skylar volunteered at a church, and Jennifer worked as a hairdresser, but beneath the a disturbing reality was uncovered. Skylar had a criminal past and was drowning in nearly $900,000 of debt. His alleged acting career, he claimed to have appeared on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers turned out to be little more than a lie. He was merely an uncredited extra in a few episodes, and despite portraying himself as financially stable, he and Jennifer were actually living in her parents' garage as police pressed Skylar. He claimed the yacht had been purchased legally with drug money. He even stated that Tom and Jackie had planned to move to Mexico and had given him power of attorney to help transfer funds to set up a new life when shown a document allegedly proving this. The signatures appeared genuine, and the notary public confirmed the transaction fingerprints and albeit. Something still didn't add up. While Skylar insisted the Hawks had willingly disappeared, their family wasn't buying it. Days turned 2 weeks with no contact. In desperation, the family took their plea public, appearing on national television and urging anyone with information to come forward. Then came the break they'd been waiting for. A tip from a man in Mexico led investigators to a car parked outside a house in Ensenada. It matched the description of Jackie's missing SUV inside. DNA testing confirmed Skylar's presence. His genetic material found on the heater knob. The man living there, an old surfing buddy of Skylar's. He claimed Skylar had given him the car, and that Jennifer had driven him back to the US afterward. This new evidence cast a dark cloud over Skylar and Jennifer's claims. Now, authorities suspected foul play. The power of attorney, initially believed to be legitimate, was once again scrutinized. A notary, Kathleen Harris, confirmed she'd witnessed Tom and Jackie signing the document, but when asked to describe the couple, she accurately depicted Tom yet completely mischaracterized Jackie. She said Jackie had brown curly hair, but at the time, Jackie's hair was short, spiked, and blonde. This contradiction raised serious red flags. Was Harris mistaken or complicit in a cover-up? Despite the fingerprints matching the Hawks, the FBI took over the case, bringing in world-renowned handwriting experts. The conclusion was shocking. Both Tom and Jackie's signatures appeared genuine, but the circumstances surrounding how the document was signed still didn't make sense. Why would the couple give complete financial control to two strangers? What began as a bittersweet sale to mark the end of a chapter had spiraled into a chilling and calculated scheme, one that ended in murder. The Hawks hadn't vanished. They had been betrayed, possibly coerced, and ultimately never returned from that final journey. As the case unfolded in court, more horrifying details would emerge. What really happened on the water that day, how greed and deception turned deadly, and how a couple chasing the dream of financial security met a fate they never deserved. There was something off about Jackie Hawks' signature, a small but troubling oddity that left investigators puzzled. The signature appeared authentic, yet something about it didn't sit right. And when the notary's description of Jackie didn't match her actual appearance, suspicions deepened. Could the notary have been deceived, or worse, complicit? Just as detectives were reeling from this unsettling revelation, they received a critical tip. Skylar DeLeon, already under scrutiny, had asked his probation officer for permission to leave the country, fearing he was about to flee. Authorities moved swiftly and arrested him, not yet for murder, but for money laundering, a crime he had earlier confessed to. When police searched the garage apartment at Jennifer's parents' house where Skylar and Jennifer were living, they found chilling evidence, personal belongings of Tom and Jackie Hawks, including their camera and driver's licenses. But one discovery stopped them cold. Jackie's driver's license photo bore an uncanny resemblance to the notary's inaccurate description. This raised further doubts about the legitimacy of the power of attorney, and whether the notary had ever truly seen Jackie at all. Then, in the cluttered garage, investigators discovered something else, a business card belonging to an LAPD detective who worked with Interpol. When they contacted the detective, he revealed something deeply disturbing. He had encountered Skylar a year earlier during a murder investigation in Mexico. The victim, an American citizen. Suddenly, a new possibility emerged. Could Skylar have been involved in both murders? But detectives still lacked proof until they noticed a strange discrepancy in photographs of the Hawks' yacht. In earlier images, the boat clearly had two anchors, but now Only one remained. A sinister theory began to form. Had the missing anchor been used to weigh down the bodies? The net was tightening, and then came a major breakthrough while reviewing the power of attorney document again. Investigators spotted a name someone listed as a witness. His name was Alonso Machain, just 19 at the time. Alonso lived with his parents had worked as a prison guard. He had developed a friendship with Skylar during the latter's time in jail for theft now. Skylar had recruited Alonso to help with the sale of the yacht. He was the slender man seen accompanying Skylar on the sea trial detectives. Offered Alonso a deal, leniency in exchange for the truth. He agreed, and as the tape recorder clicked on, Alonso began to speak. What he revealed was horrifying. Skylar hadn't acted alone. He had enlisted the help of another man, John Fitzgerald, Kennedy not the president, but a notorious ex-con and gang member. Skylar had introduced Kennedy as his accountant. But that was just part of the ruse. Alonso described a calculated and brutal plan to lure the Hawks out to sea, force them to sign over power of attorney, and eliminate them. The trap was set during the sea trial. Kennedy pretended to be seasick and went below deck concerned. Tom followed. That's when Skylar and Kennedy attacked upstairs. Jackie grew worried, but before she could react, Alonso grabbed her. He used a taser to subdue her, then handcuffed her and led her away. Both Tom and Jackie were bound and gagged, their eyes and mouths taped shut in a moment of desperate tenderness. Tom, his handcuffed fingers barely able to move, stroked Jackie's hand. It was a silent attempt to comfort her, to say goodbye. Then came the ultimatum in the galley of their own boat, with a power of attorney document laid before them. The couple were given a chilling choice: sign and maybe live, refuse and die to fight. They complied. The boat steered toward the waters near Catalina Island, once a place of joy. Now the stage 4, unspeakable horror on deck. The couple were bound together with rope. Skylar released one of the yacht's anchors and dragged the chain across the floor, a sound the couple had heard hundreds of times. Now marking their doom, Jackie pleaded for her life. She said she wanted to see her grandchild. She said she was too young to die. Tom told her they would be together then. They were shoved overboard, dragged into the depths of the Pacific Ocean, never to be seen again. Their bodies were never recovered. After the murder, Skylar began a cold-blooded cleanup. He tossed the couple's belongings, photos, identification, memories into the ocean. Then, as if nothing had happened, he and Kennedy fished on the way back to Newport Harbor, laughing and relaxing while the anchor pulled the couple's bodies deeper into the sea. But justice was coming. Skylar, Kennedy, Jennifer, and Alonso were all arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Jennifer Henderson continued to defend her husband, but investigators uncovered damning evidence. She had tried to drain the Hawks' accounts, proving she was part of the plan. And there was more. Maren Gardner, another former gang member and convict, had introduced Skylar to John F. Kennedy, though he didn't take part in the killings. Gardner was charged with involuntary manslaughter for facilitating the connection. The trials were long and devastating. Jennifer was convicted and sentenced in October 2007 to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was sentenced to death on May 1, 2009, and sent to death row at San Quentin State Prison. Alonso, who testified against the others, pleaded guilty and received a reduced sentence of 20 years and 4 months. He became eligible for parole in 2021. Myron Gardner eventually pled guilty to being an accessory after the fact, and his murder charges were dropped, but Skylar's saga didn't end there. While awaiting trial, he made a chilling request to another inmate, tasking him to carry out a hit on his own family members. The plot was never carried out, but it painted a dark picture of Skylar's twisted mind. Then another revelation emerged. Skylar had been linked to the 2003 murder of an American citizen, John Jarvie. In Mexico, his cousin and father were listed as key witnesses in that case. On April 10, 2009, the jury found Skylar De Leon guilty of the murders of Tom and Jackie Hawks and John Jarvie. He was sentenced to death by Judge Frank Favel in Orange County Superior Court, Shortly before his conviction, on March 13, 2008, Skyler made headlines for yet another disturbing act. While in jail, he partially severed his own penis with a razor blade. When asked why, he told authorities he wanted to transition to a woman. He had already changed his name from John Julius Jacobson to Skyler DeLeona, gender-neutral name, Skyler. DeLeon's defense team offered a controversial explanation for the motive behind the murders of Tom and Jackie Hawks. They argued that DeLeon's desperation for money stemmed from a personal need to fund gender reassignment surgery. However, no personal struggle, no matter how profound, can justify cold-blooded murder. In 2019, DeLeon legally changed gender and is now known as Skyler Presosa DeLeon. Still, the pain and outrage felt by the Hawks family remain. They remember Tom and Jackie as vibrant, adventurous souls, people who radiated kindness and authenticity. Their journey ended in unimaginable cruelty, but their legacy endures, etched deeply into the hearts of those who loved them. May Tom and Jackie rest in eternal peace. Hello friends, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're exploring a case that shook the world, a story of humiliation, rage, and revenge. It's said that a woman scorned is capable of anything, and sometimes that revenge takes a shocking, violent form. Our story begins in the early 1990s, when a quiet suburban couple, John and Lorena Bobbitt, became the center of one of the most sensational cases in true crime history. So notorious was this incident that the surname Bobbitt became a verb, to bobbit, meaning to cut, to chop, or to mutilate. But beneath the tabloid headlines was a disturbing narrative of abuse, trauma, and systemic silence around marital assault, a topic that, at the time, many chose to ignore. Lorena Leonore Bobbitt was born on May 15, 1970, in Bu, a modest town in eastern Ecuador, near the Chimborazo province, the youngest of three. Lorena came from a humble background. During her early school years, her family relocated to Caracas, Venezuela, in search of better opportunities. Lorena was intelligent, focused, and determined. Tragedy struck when she lost her father during her teenage years, and her already fragile relationship with her mother, Ilia Gallo, grew increasingly strained. Upon graduating high school, Lorena set her sights on the United States. She moved in with her cousin, Jana Bosti, who was strict, conservative, and set firm rules in her household. Despite the rigid environment, Lorena felt the U.S. offered her the kind of future she could never hope for in Latin America. Fascinated by the beauty industry, she began training to become a manicurist. Her cousin owned a beauty salon in the city center and was happy to mentor her, allowing Lorena to watch, learn, and eventually work part-time. She enrolled in college and saved every penny she could. Months after her arrival in the U.S., Lorena had found her rhythm, balancing work, studies, and adapting to a new culture. In September 1988, Lorena decided to go out for a night of fun with friends. It was her first time visiting a nightclub. Nervous but excited, she dressed modestly, styled her hair, and applied light makeup. That night would change her life. Inside the club's buzzing, carefree atmosphere, a tall, attractive man caught her eye. He smiled, she smiled back. He approached her, his name, John Wayne Bobbitt. He was charming, confident, and quick with a compliment. They danced, they laughed, and when the night was over, John walked her home the next day. He called and asked her out. Their courtship was sweet and seemingly wholesome, but Lorena's cousin had strict expectations. No serious relationship without family approval. John respected this and made a good impression. During dinner at Jana's home, he was polite, thoughtful, and won over her protective cousin. 6 months later, he proposed. Lorena, overjoyed and in love, said yes. She had always dreamed of a home, children, and a devoted partner. The wedding, held in June 1989, was modest. They had no money for extravagance, so they opted for a simple ceremony and used their savings on a honeymoon by the ocean. Their life together began in Virginia, in a quiet neighborhood. At first, everything felt perfect, like a fairy tale. They were tender, affectionate, and deeply in love. But as 1990 approached, things began to shift. John's demeanor changed at first. It was minor snide comments, impatience, but soon his behavior grew darker. One night, when Lorena served soup that had gone cold, John exploded. He hurled the plate onto the floor, screamed at her, and called her names. She tried to reason with him, but he began controlling her every move, monitoring where she went, who she spoke to in the home. He made the rules, and when it came to intimacy, it happened only on his terms. Regardless of Lorena's consent, she was trapped, unable to share her suffering with anyone, not even her cousin Lorena. Carried the weight of this pain in silence, but, as we'll soon discover, silence doesn't last forever. The rage she held inside, the fear, the trauma, the humiliation, was building to an eruption, and when it finally exploded, it wouldn't just change her life. It would make history. On June 22, 1993, Lorena Bobbitt stayed home alone while her husband, John, went out for a night of drinking and partying with a longtime military friend. She didn't wait up for him around midnight. Lorena went to bed, unaware that the course of her life was about to change forever. Around 3 a.m., a heavily intoxicated and aroused John returned without warning or consent. He ripped the shirt from his sleeping wife and forced himself on her. Lorena, still groggy and terrified, begged him to stop. She cried and pleaded, but John showed no compassion when it was over. He simply rolled over and passed out, trembling and sobbing. Lorena got out of bed and went to the kitchen. She poured a glass of water, trying to steady her nerves, but then her eyes landed on a wooden stand, holding several kitchen knives, acting almost instinctively, as if in a trance. She grabbed a large carving knife, still emotionally shattered and numb. Lorena returned to the bedroom. John lay on his back, snoring without hesitation. She grabbed his genitals with her left hand, squeezed tightly, and with one swift motion of the blade, severed them. John awoke, screaming in unimaginable pain. Lorena, still in shock, calmly walked out of the room, went to the garage, got into her car, and drove off into the night. At a red light, she glanced down and realized she was still clutching the severed part of her husband's body in her hand. In a moment of revulsion, she rolled down the window and tossed it into a nearby field, then continued driving. Eventually, she arrived at a close friend's home. Her friend, horrified by Lorena's appearance and the bloody state she was in, called the police and summoned paramedics. Back at the Bobbitt home, John was desperately trying to stop the bleeding, using a bedsheet. The groin contains major arteries, and severing them usually leads to death from rapid blood loss. Miraculously, a blood clot had begun to form, slowing the bleeding just enough. EMTs arrived in time and rushed him to the hospital, but one question remained. Where was the severed organ? Lorena, now in custody, pointed investigators to the general area where she had discarded it. After a thorough search, officers located it in a field. The organ was cleaned, placed in ice, and transported to the hospital. There, a specialist surgeon brought in from the state capital performed a grueling 9-hour procedure to reattach it against all odds. The operation was successful. As news broke, the case became a media frenzy, an instant flashpoint in the national conversation on domestic abuse, gender roles, and marital power dynamics. That same night, Lorena was arrested and interrogated. She confessed, fully and openly, describing years of relentless abuse at the hands of her husband. She spoke of physical beatings, emotional cruelty, and being coerced into sex whenever John pleased. Perhaps most painful of all, she revealed that he had once forced her to have an abortion. A pregnancy she desperately wanted to keep pass. She recounted the events of that night. Lorena said she felt like she was in a fog. She remembered being assaulted, walking to the kitchen, and then only flashes her husband's screams, the roar of her car engine, and the severed flesh still in her hand as she sat at a red light. The case divided public opinion. Many women, especially survivors of domestic violence, railed to Lorena. Defense feminist groups, already gaining traction in the early 90s, pointed to her story as proof of a deeper societal issue: how women were silenced, blamed and trapped in abusive marriages at the time. Spousal abuse was often downplayed, and marital rape was still widely misunderstood. Even acknowledged legally, a wife was expected to be submissive. Her refusal, punishable. Men, on the other hand, largely supported John. Many feared that Lorena's act might inspire other battered women to do the same, with millions of women reportedly suffering domestic abuse across the U.S. The fear, least among men, was palpable. The legal saga unfolded in two dramatic trials. First, John faced charges not for years of abuse, but only for the sexual assault that Lorena said occurred that night in court. Lorena testified to the trauma she had endured over the course of their marriage. Friends backed her up, recalling the bruises and emotional distress they had seen in her. It was also revealed that John didn't hold steady employment and often manipulated Lorena into giving him money, which he spent at clubs. Still, when it came to the assault on June 23rd, the evidence was deemed insufficient. John offered inconsistent accounts of what happened. Ultimately, the jury, comprised of 9 women and 3 men, found him not guilty. Lorena's own trial began in September 1993. She was charged with malicious wounding. Her defense team argued that she had been suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder brought on by long-term emotional and physical abuse. A psychiatric evaluation confirmed that she was not in control of her actions that night. She had, essentially, snapped. In January 1994, after hours of deliberation, the jury agreed Lorena was not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. She was ordered to undergo a 45-day psychiatric evaluation, after which she was released and allowed to resume her life. The couple officially divorced in 1995, and Lorena returned to using her maiden name as for John. He remained angry that Lorena had walked free and decided to capitalize on his infamy. He formed a band, brazenly called Severed Parts, but it failed to gain traction. Later, he was offered a lucrative deal to appear in adult films, seeking both money and notoriety. He agreed and stepped into yet another bizarre chapter of his already surreal life. John Wayne Bobbitt, once thrust into international fame due to a highly publicized and bizarre incident, attempted to capitalize on his notoriety by entering the adult film industry. He starred in explicitly titled movies such as Frank and Penis, a parody of Frankenstein, and John Wayne Bobbitt. Uncut, though his surgically reattached organ was initially a subject of intense public curiosity, the fascination quickly faded. For years, John actively sought media attention, appearing on talk shows and giving numerous interviews, but as time passed, those opportunities dried up with dwindling fame and few prospects. He eventually found work as a bartender at an entertainment venue in Las Vegas. By the time he reached his 50s, John was scraping by, taking on odd jobs such as a mover, delivery driver, and even delivering pizzas. In 1999, he received a suspended sentence for theft. His personal life was equally tumultuous. During the peak of the media frenzy, it was revealed that he had an illegitimate son named Andrew, born in 1992 to one of his former lovers, Beatrice Williams. Legal troubles continued. In 1994, John was convicted of assaulting his then-girlfriend, nightclub dancer Christina Elliott. He spent 15 days in jail and was placed on probation. Early 2000s saw a pattern repeat. John was arrested 3 more times, this time for assaulting his wife, Joanna Farrell. His repeated offenses led to a year-long imprisonment for probation violation, and the couple divorced in 2004. Segment 2. Lorena's life after the incident. Lorena, on the other hand, took a drastically different path. Unlike her ex-husband, she did not relish the spotlight. In 1996, she returned to Ecuador to live with her mother, Ilia. However, just 6 months later, she was back in the news after her mother accused her of assault. The matter was settled privately and never went to court. In 1997, Lorena returned to the U.S., where she opened a small beauty salon in Washington, D.C. In 2007, she founded Lena's Red Wagon, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping survivors of domestic violence. She broke her media silence during an appearance on CBS News Morning Show and later on the Oprah Winfrey Show, where she reflected on her life after the scandal. Arena later married a man named Dave Bellinger, with whom she had a daughter in 2006. She preferred not to discuss her past with John and claimed she no longer followed his life. However, in 2009, nearly 15 years after their explosive divorce, the former couple reunited on The Insider. During the episode, John offered an emotional apology and professed that he still loved her. Lorena, visibly moved, confirmed that he still sent her flowers and cards every Valentine's Day. Segment 3. The McDermott Family Tragedy. On May 25, 2013, while Marshall University was preparing to celebrate a new graduating class, a devastating event unfolded at the home of Mark and Joanna McDermott, an event that would shatter their family forever. Mark McDermott, originally from Australia and described by relatives as a kind and generous man, had raised Joanna's son, Donald Wayne Dunn, as his own. Mark's younger sister, Nicole, once said, "Mark never had children of his own, but he loved Donald as if he did." Joanna had been a single mother when she met Mark, struggling to raise Donald on her own. She often left him in the care of her parents. Their lives changed dramatically after she married Mark. Together, they created a family, and Donald developed a strong bond with his stepfather, even during periods of separation between Joanna and Mark. Donald chose to live with Mark, further proving their deep connection despite limited information about their past. One thing was certain: Mark had supported Donald through everything. When Donald enrolled at Rio Nova Community College in 2008, Mark funded his education. Later, when Donald transferred to Marshall University, the McDermotts continued to cover all his living expenses, clothing, and car insurance, allowing him to focus solely on his studies. Donald had a long-term girlfriend and was considered a dedicated, focused student. Often skipping social plans to study. His graduation day was meant to be a proud milestone, but that morning, an emergency 911 call was placed from the McDermott residence 911 dispatcher. "What is your name?" "Joanna." "Joanna McDermott, I shot my husband. Is he breathing?" "No." "Was it an accident?" "No, we were fighting. This was supposed to be a happy day, your child's graduation." "Yes." When police arrived at the scene, Sergeant Greg Ken of the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office found Joanna in shock inside the house. Mark was found slumped on the couch, with gunshot wounds to his head and shoulder. It appeared he had been reading. At the time of the attack, the coroner confirmed the cause of death was due to the head wounds. Though death had not been immediate, he had bled heavily at the time. Donald was preparing for his graduation and reportedly did not hear the shooting due to noise from the shower. What should have been a day of celebration became the darkest chapter in his life. Segment 4. The confession that changed everything. Donald never heard the gunshots. The sound was muffled by the running shower. It wasn't until he stepped out of the bathroom that he stumbled into a nightmare. His stepfather, Mark, was lying motionless in the living room. The 911 call captured Joanna's frantic voice. "Operator, how old is your husband?" "Joanna, my husband is 54. Operator, and you were just fighting." "Joanna, yes. Operator, did you shoot him in the side?" "Joanna, no, in the head. Operator, in the head." "Joanna, yes. Operator, all right, try not to touch anything." "Joanna, my son is in the bathroom. I need to go downstairs so he can assist me." "Operator, how old is your son?" "Joanna, he's 23. Operator, does he know what happened?" "Joanna, he doesn't. He's getting ready for graduation." On the dining room table sat a pistol and next to it, a handwritten letter addressed to Donald. In it, Joanna explained that her marriage had become unbearable. She wrote that she could no longer remain in a relationship with someone she didn't love, and apologized for leaving Donald's life without seeing him become a man. Police arrived swiftly. Joanna and Donald were taken in separate patrol cars to the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office for questioning. Initially, investigators believed they were dealing with a tragic case of domestic violence. Joanna had confessed to pulling the trigger during a heated argument, claiming she'd acted in the heat of the moment, without truly realizing what she'd done. But what happened next changed the course of the entire investigation. Segment 5. Joanna's shocking revelation. As the patrol car doors shut behind her, Joanna turned to the officer beside her and, quietly, said, "I didn't kill Mark. Donald did." That single sentence flipped everything investigators thought they knew inside the interrogation room. Joanna recounted the events of that fateful morning to Captain James Barr. She explained that the day began normally. She had gone out to run errands and buy groceries while Donald got ready for graduation. When she returned home, Donald met her at the car and asked her to close her eyes. He said he had a surprise for her, trusting her son. Joanna followed him blindly into the house and sat down in the dining room, anticipating a celebration. She heard it, the unmistakable metallic click of a gun, when she opened her eyes. Joanna found herself face to face with the barrel of her own pistol, held firmly in Donald's hands. He pulled the trigger, but the gun didn't fire, acting quickly. Joanna wrestled the weapon from him, shaken, terrified, but alive. She looked toward the living room and saw Mark's lifeless body. In a split-second decision, she told Donald she would take the blame for the murder. Joanna explained, during interrogation, that she believed her son would kill her too if she didn't act fast. She promised to call 911 and say she was responsible. Donald hesitated at first, but ultimately agreed. Joanna admitted that she knew what she was doing could land her in prison, but it was the only way she could protect herself. Through tears, she told investigators, "In 23 years of being his mother, I never thought he would point a gun at me." The pistol Donald used was Joanna's. She suspected that it failed to fire because the slide hadn't been pulled back completely yet. Safety feature in most semi-automatic firearms. Captain Barr found her story disturbingly plausible from the moment he met Donald. Something had felt off for a young man whose stepfather had just been murdered. Donald's demeanor was far too calm. He showed no visible emotion, no panic, no grief. Segment 6. Donald's confession. Donald was placed in a separate room for questioning at first. He denied any involvement, but when informed of Joanna's version of events, his carefully crafted facade fell apart. There was no need for intimidation. Captain Barr didn't threaten or manipulate him. He didn't have to. Donald confessed willingly. The story he told stunned even seasoned investigators. It began years earlier, after Donald's first year in college. He was failing, though his initial classes were manageable. Things quickly became more demanding, and Donald lacked the discipline to keep up. Rather than admit his failure, he dropped out and told no one for the next 4.5 years. Donald maintained an elaborate leech day. He left home as though going to class. He returned at scheduled times. He claimed he was studying or working on assignments when he was actually hiding the truth. He went so far as to forge grade reports. Even his girlfriend and her family believed he was a diligent student. Rachel Rush, the sister of Donald's girlfriend, later said, "He made it seem like he was focused. We had no idea what was going on." All the while, his parents continued to support him, paying tuition, car insurance, rent, clothes, and everything in between. Donald told investigators he hadn't intended to deceive them forever, but the lie grew bigger, and so did the fear. He was terrified that Mark and Joanna would cut him off if they learned the truth. Despite acting like material things didn't matter to him, Donald admitted that losing the comfortable lifestyle terrified him. Segment 7. Premeditation and the plan to kill. Over time, a darker idea began to take shape in Donald's mind. He started fantasizing about a way out, not through confession or redemption, but through murder. He began planning it all. Donald wanted to stage a scene that would deflect suspicion. He drafted a letter similar to the one left on the dining table, meant to look like a suicide note or a domestic murder suicida. Chose the morning of his graduation, the day his lie would unravel as the moment to act. But when the pistol jammed, his plan collapsed. Joanna's quick thinking saved her life and ultimately exposed the horrifying truth. The pistol lay on the dining table, next to a letter, its handwriting shaky, its words raw. It was addressed to Donald, and its contents painted a picture of a woman broken by an unhappy marriage. Joanna wrote of her pain, of a love that had vanished, and of An apology for leaving her son behind on the surface. It read like the final words of a woman who had just murdered her husband and planned to take her own life, but that wasn't the truth, not even close. Shortly after making the 911 call, Joanna and her son Donald were taken in separate police cruisers to the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office. Officers expected this to be another tragic case of domestic violence. In her initial call, Joanna claimed that a fight with her husband, Mark, had escalated, and in a moment of blind rage, she had shot him in the head. But once the car doors closed and she was out of her son's earshot, Joanna's story changed. Dramatically, she told investigators that it wasn't her who had pulled the trigger, it was her 23-year-old son, Donald. The story that began to unravel inside the interrogation room stunned even the most seasoned officers. Speaking with Captain James Barr of the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office, Joanna recounted the events of May 25, 2013. That morning, she'd left the house to run errands. When she returned, Donald greeted her in the driveway and asked her to close her eyes. He said he had a surprise for her, trusting her son. Joanna complied. He led her into the dining room, sat her down, and that's when she heard the chilling click of a firearm. When she opened her eyes, she found herself staring down the barrel of her own pistol. It jammed. That malfunction saved her life. In a surge of panic and instinct, Joanna managed to wrest the weapon from Donald's hands, and then, thinking quickly, she told him she'd take the blame, that she would call 911 and say it was her who had shot Mark. To her shock, Donald agreed. Joanna confessed that she had never imagined her son would point a gun at her head, let alone pull the trigger. She told investigators that she feared if she didn't protect herself with this lie, he would try again. Captain Barr found her story credible, especially after observing Donald's unsettling calm demeanor in such a dire situation. Donald appeared oddly composed, his expression neutral. Barr ordered him to be questioned separately. At first, Donald denied everything, but once he was told about his mother's statement, his facade cracked. There was no need for intimidation, no pressure or manipulation. Donald began to confess voluntarily. What he revealed was deeply disturbing. Donald had dropped out of college during his first year, unable to cope with academic demands. But instead of coming clean, he fabricated an entire life. He pretended to attend classes, forged grade reports, and maintained the illusion of a hardworking student. Even his girlfriend and her family believed the lie. For 4.5 years, Donald lived a double life, spending his days locked in his room, claiming he was working on assignments while secretly doing nothing at all. His parents continued to support him financially, unaware of the elaborate deception. Eventually, the weight of the lie became too much, but instead of telling the truth, Donald chose a darker path. He devised a plan to kill his mother and stepfather on the day of his graduation, a day that was supposed to be a celebration. Donald took Joanna's pistol and kept it with him. He even visited a local supermarket to create a false alibi, ensuring that surveillance cameras would record him at the time of the murder. He believed that the note he left behind would make it look like Joanna had reached a breaking point in her marriage. He hoped authorities would believe it was a murder-suicide bet. The plan fell apart when the pistol jammed. Joanna survived. Captain Barr later revealed that Donald had even rehearsed the facial expressions he would wear when the police arrived. He'd thought about what he'd say, how he'd act, and how he would support himself after losing the financial backing of his parents. He figured relatives might take pity on him and help him out eventually. He planned to get in shape and join the police force, or military. When asked why he chose murder over honesty, Donald simply said that telling the truth had become too difficult. It was, in his mind, easier to kill. In June 2013, Donald was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder. In the months leading up to the trial, his legal team sought multiple delays. At one point, Donald underwent surgery on his right hand while in solitary confinement. His attorneys argued that he would be under the influence of strong painkillers and unfit to participate, but the court found no credible impairment during earlier hearings and denied the request. Trial began in August 2014. Over a year after Mark's death, Judge John A. Hutchinson presided. with David White representing Donald and Christine Keller prosecuting the case for Raleigh. County Mark's family traveled from Australia to attend the proceedings, although full transcripts and trial footage were not made available. It's known that the defense intended to claim Donald had been under the influence of illegal substances at the time of the murder, though no toxicology reports ever confirmed this. On August 14, 2014, Donald Dunn was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Mark McDermott. He was also convicted of attempted murder for pointing the gun at Joanna and for the use of a firearm in committing both crimes on September 5. Judge Hutchinson sentenced Donald to life in prison without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 15 years for the attempted murder of his mother. After the sentence, Joanna read an emotional letter in court. She spoke of her son's struggles, hinted at unresolved trauma, and questioned whether her own pressure for academic success or years of violent video games had played a role. She disagreed with the sentence, calling it too severe. Judge Hutchinson was firm. While he sympathized with Joanna, he made it clear that shielding her son from consequences was not an option. Justice, he said, had to prevail. Mark's sister and father echoed the court's sentiment, though nothing would bring Mark back. They were grateful for the judgment and the closure it offered. 1985. The first night of a new life becomes the last. On July 6, 1985, 54-year-old Jane Anchor Hilton and her 13-year-old daughter Autumn moved into a new home in El Dorado Hills, California. The house belonged to Jane's employer, Wilma McLean, who had opened her doors to Jane as she sought refuge from a deteriorating marriage. It was meant to be a fresh start, a chance to rebuild her life, but by morning, Jane would be dead by all accounts. The house was full that night. Living there were Wilma, her daughter Maureen, Maureen's boyfriend, Wilma's grandson Ricky Davis, and Ricky's girlfriend, 19-year-old Connie Dahl. That night, Davis and Dahl had attended a party. They returned home around 3:30 a.m. to find young Autumn outside. Looking distressed, she told them she had stayed out late and feared her mother would be angry. The three of them walked inside together and into a nightmare. Blood-stained, the hallway carpet. The house was eerily silent. They followed the trail of blood to Maureen's room, only to find Jane Hilton lying on the bed, covered in blood. She had been brutally beaten, stabbed 29 times, and even bitten on the shoulder. There were no signs of life. Ricky and Connie immediately called 911, but it was too late. Jane was pronounced dead at the scene, a senseless killing and a cold. Trail detectives began their investigation by interviewing those closest to Jane. Her estranged husband, Archie Hilton, was initially a person of interest. The couple had been going through a rocky period, making him a logical suspect. However, Archie had a solid alibi and willingly provided a DNA sample. He also insisted there had been no serious problems between them and claimed the marriage wasn't truly over. He was cleared, and with no other promising leads, the case went cold. 1999. The case reopens and takes a turn 14 years later. In 1999, El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Rick Fitzgerald and Richard Strasser reopened the case. As they sifted through old reports and media coverage, they came across a quote in a news article given by Connie Dahl. In it, she described Jane's body as being found in the position she normally slept in, on the bed. This seemed to contradict an old, barely audible recording of Ricky Davis allegedly stating the body had been found on the floor. The detectives saw an opportunity to push harder. At the time, Connie Dahl was already serving a jail sentence in Oregon for an unrelated offense. She was brought in for questioning, and the pressure campaign began. False memories, coerced testimony. Over the course of 4 separate interrogations spanning 18 months, Dahl was systematically manipulated. Detectives used leading questions, repeated false claims about DNA evidence, and implied she could face murder charges if she didn't cooperate. They offered her a reduced sentence, just 1 year in jail if she implicated Davis in the murder. They showed her crime scene photos, hinted at details like the bite mark, and slowly guided her toward a confession eventually. Dahl began remembering things investigators had essentially fed to her. She said that Ricky Davis had gotten into an argument with Jane that night, supposedly because Jane wouldn't let her daughter Autumn attend a party with them. The argument, she claimed, escalated into a violent frenzy. In some versions of her story, she said Autumn was present and sprayed with blood. In another, Dahl even claimed she had bitten Jane on the shoulder herself, despite her constantly changing story. Dahl's testimony would become the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Davis convicted, but the fight wasn't over. Davis and Autumn Anchor were both re-interviewed after Dahl's statements. They stood by their original account of discovering the body upon returning home, but the detectives lied to Davis, claiming that Autumn had turned against him. They used threats of culpability against Autumn in an attempt to pressure her, but neither she nor Davis wavered. Nevertheless, Davis was arrested, and Dahl was offered a plea deal in exchange for testifying against him. Davis's first trial ended in a mistrial, but in 2005, during a second trial, Dahl took the stand. She repeated her now-rehearsed version of events, how she allegedly fought with Jane, accidentally bit her, then stepped outside while Davis continued the attack. She claimed she heard screams and gurgling as Davis murdered Jane in cold blood based solely on her testimony. Ricky Davis was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 16 years in prison. Dahl received a plea deal, manslaughter, and 1 year in county jail in 2014. She died of a drug overdose. New Hope, DNA, and the Innocence Project. Still, Davis refused to give up. In 2006, he contacted the Northern California Innocence Project (NCIP), a nonprofit based at Santa Clara University School of Law. The organization, founded in 2001, specialized in using DNA evidence to overturn wrongful convictions, working in collaboration with the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office. The NCIP arranged for post-conviction DNA testing of biological materials from the crime scene, including Jane's nightgown and samples from under her fingernails. What they discovered would change everything. In 1985, Wilma welcomed her daughter Jane Hilton and 13-year-old granddaughter Autumn Anchor into her home. By all accounts, it was a full house, and tragically, the first night of their new life together would also be the last night of Jane's life. At around 3:30 a.m., 20-year-old Ricky Davis and his 19-year-old girlfriend, Connie Dahl, returned from a party to find Autumn lingering outside the house. Autumn told them she was afraid to go in, worried that her mother would be angry about how late she was. The three of them walked into the house together, and what they found was horrifying. There was blood in the hallway. The house was eerily silent. As they moved toward the first bedroom belonging to Ricky's mother, who was away camping, they discovered Jane Hilton's lifeless body on the bed. She had been brutally beaten, bitten on the shoulder, and stabbed 29 times. Davis and Dahl immediately called 911, but paramedics could only confirm what was already evident. Jane Hilton was dead. Her murder was brutal, senseless, and left the community shocked. Detectives began interviewing those closest to Jane. Her estranged husband, Archie Hilton, was a primary suspect due to ongoing marital tensions. However, Archie had a solid alibi, and DNA later ruled him out completely with no clear leads. The case went cold until 1999, when El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Rick Strasser and Richard Fitzgerald reopened the case while reviewing old case files. The detectives came across a news article in which Connie Dahl, Ricky Davis's former girlfriend, described finding Jane Hilton's body positioned as if she was sleeping. That detail stood out. Investigators believed it contradicted an old, muffled audio tape where they thought Davis had claimed Jane's body was on the floor. Though this supposed contradiction was weak, it became a crucial piece in a renewed investigation. Dahl was serving time in Oregon on unrelated charges when she was brought in for questioning over the course of 4 intense interrogations spanning 18 months. Detectives used highly coercive tactics, including threats of charging her with murder unless she cooperated. They falsely told her DNA evidence would tie her to the crime. In reality, no such DNA testing had been done at that time. They showed Doll crime scene photos and spoon-fed her details of the details she eventually adopted into a new, fabricated account. She began recalling things that matched police theories, but with major inconsistencies in one version. She said Autumn was present during the murder and was sprayed with blood in another. Doll claimed she herself bit Jane's shoulder. She alleged the killing began after Davis erupted in rage when Jane wouldn't let Autumn attend a party. The details kept shifting. Doll couldn't identify the murder weapon or where it had been. Hidden still. Her evolving story placed Davis and sometimes Autumn at the center of the crime, with Doll's coerced confession. Davis became the prime suspect. Both Davis and Autumn were interrogated again despite pressure and deceptive tactics, including being falsely told that the other had implicated them. Both held firm to their original stories, but it didn't matter. Doll accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Davis. She would face a lesser charge, manslaughter, and serve just 1 year in jail. Davis was arrested. His first trial ended in a mistrial, but in 2005, his second trial led to a conviction for second-degree murder. The conviction rested solely on Doll's testimony. Davis was sentenced to 16 years to life. Doll served her year and was released only to later die of a drug overdose in 2014, but Davis never stopped fighting. In 2006, he contacted the Northern California Innocence Project, NCIP, a legal nonprofit dedicated to exonerating the wrongly convicted. Working with the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office, the NCIP arranged for previously untested DNA from the crime scene material found on Jane Hilton's nightgown and beneath her fingernails to finally be analyzed. The results were groundbreaking. The DNA belonged to an unknown male. It did not match Ricky Davis, it did not match Connie Doll, and it did not match Autumn Anchor or Archie Hilton. In fact, the DNA excluded every suspect law enforcement had focused on for decades. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, but no matches came back. Still, the evidence was clear. The state had convicted the wrong man at the time. California's post-conviction relief laws made it incredibly difficult to reverse wrongful convictions. A 2015 review by false confession expert Dr. Richard Leo found that investigators had employed techniques known to elicit false confessions, manipulating Doll into giving them what they wanted to hear in response. NCIP co-sponsored Senate Bill 1134. It passed in 2017 and made it easier for inmates to prove new evidence. Would have likely changed a jury's decision based on this new law and the DNA results. A judge vacated Davis's conviction in 2019 and ordered a new trial. It was initially set for the fall, then delayed to April 2020 due to health issues with Davis's defense attorney. But then, a major development emerged thanks to genetic genealogy. In early 2020, investigators used this emerging science to trace the crime scene DNA through family tree databases. In February, they found their match. Michael Green was a longtime Roseville, California resident who had never been in trouble with the law. In 1985, he was just 17 years old on the night Jane Hilton was murdered. He'd been at a park with Autumn and 2 other boys. Autumn briefly left to shower and returned to join them, but police now believe that during this window, Green broke into the Hilton home and was confronted by Jane. A struggle ensued in a fit of panic or rage. Green killed her after the murder. Davis, Doll, and Autumn unknowingly walked into the scene. Michael Green was arrested on February 11, 2020, and initially appeared in juvenile court because of his age at the time of the crime. He was later transferred to adult court and, after 2.5 years of legal proceedings, pleaded no contest on July 29, 2022. That plea meant he waived his right to a jury trial and accepted the murder charge without admitting guilt at sentencing. Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman testified about adolescent brain development and the diminished impulse control of teenagers' friends, family, and even Green's ex-wife. Karen described him as kind, funny, and gentle, a man they could never have imagined committing such a crime, but those descriptions clashed with the raw pain of Jane Hilton's children Heather Purvis McConnell, one of Jane's daughters, told the court, "The why it happened and how different my life could have been will haunt me forever." Arguth Brandon Hilton, another of Jane's children, said, "I love my mother, and I assume Leo loves his mother too. I want to know what he would feel or what he would say to the man who took her from me." The exoneration of Ricky Davis and the truth behind Jane Hilton's murder. What would you do if someone told you your mother had been stabbed 29 times in your family home? What would you say to the person who did it? These were the haunting questions posed by Jane Hilton's daughter, Arguth. As she stood before the court delivering a victim impact statement that shook the room, she described the overwhelming grief of collecting her mother's belongings from the very house where she was murdered, ending her address with a devastating truth. "We will always have something in common. Regret. You'll regret the decision you made 37 years ago." Her brother Ian Hilton echoed her pain through tears. He recounted the nightmares their family endured, especially during the years when suspicion cruelly fell on their own sister. Autumn struggling through his final words, he whispered, "All the words we say will never bring my mother back." Autumn herself was the last to speak. Her statement was filled with raw agony for decades. She had lived under a shadow of doubt. She recalled the day two mustachioed detectives came into her home and told her they had found the people responsible for her mother's murder, only to turn around and accuse her. She was interrogated, accused of biting her mother and moving her body, and was subjected to harsh questioning until she asked for a lawyer. That single word may have spared her from further coercion. Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden then read a statement on behalf of the Hilton family. It addressed Michael Green, directly the man who, after decades of secrecy, had finally been identified through advanced DNA testing. Linden asked, "Why? Why did you end Jane's life so brutally? You beat her, you kicked her, you bit her on the shoulder. Do you even remember her? Did you ever think about who she was, the mother, the woman, the person?" The statement highlighted how Jane Hilton's murder shattered lives, not only by robbing her children of their mother, but by casting suspicion, dividing a family, and convicting an innocent man. Green's defense attorney, Margaret Husher, argued that her client had been just a teenager at the time, operating under the impulsive and underdeveloped cognition of adolescence. Citing testimony from psychological expert Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, she asked the court for mercy, but Judge Suzanne Kingsbury interjected, "The court is not going to put him on probation." Linden thanked the judge and said that probation would be a set. Green had already gotten away with murder for 37 years. Granting leniency would only prolong that injustice. Judge Kingsbury, a veteran of 26 years on the bench, declared that Jane Hilton's murder was among the most brutal she had ever encountered. She apologized to the family for their long-standing trauma and expressed hope that they could begin to heal. To Green, she offered a challenge: "You hold the key to the answers these people need. Using the resources of the Department of Rehabilitation, you can provide those answers that may help with your parole." She acknowledged that friends and acquaintances had testified to Green's kind nature, that he had led a normal life and had the potential to contribute positively to society, but none of that changed what had happened. Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and remanded to El Dorado County Jail before being transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. A restitution hearing was scheduled for a later date. Meanwhile, Ricky Davis, the man wrongly convicted for Jane Hilton's murder, was released on February 13, 2020. He celebrated with his family over pizza his first taste of freedom in 18 years. Attorney Melissa O'Connell confirmed he would receive over $750,000 in state compensation, but as she said, no amount of money could replace the years stolen from him. Davis went on to file an $18 million lawsuit against the state of California, El Dorado County, and several individuals involved in his wrongful conviction, including former detectives Richard Strasser, Rick Fitzgerald, Larry Henk, and even deceased Officer Bill Wilson, sued through his estate. County pathologist Dr. Robert Anthony was also named in the suit, according to the Village Life newspaper. Davis was homeless following his release. The lawsuit remains pending as of 2022. The case triggered sweeping legal reforms in September 2022. California passed Assembly Bill 2644, which effective January 1, 2024 prohibits law enforcement from using threats, deception, or psychological manipulation during custodial interrogations of minors. El Dorado County District Attorney Vern Pearson has committed to adopting this policy and is urging other DAs to do the same. Pearson publicly apologized for the misconduct of previous investigators and the profound miscarriage of justice suffered by Davis. He admitted that 10 years ago, he might have viewed those tactics differently, but now sees how damaging they truly are. From this day forward, the office will reject any case built primarily on a confession extracted through coercive methods. After 37 years, the man who committed the brutal murder of Jane Hilton is finally facing justice, but the lives affected Jane's children, her friends, Ricky Davis, and even Michael Green's loved ones remain permanently scarred. Ricky Davis can never regain what was taken from him. Jane Hilton's family will never get back the years lost to grief, suspicion, and pain, and the legacy of a single decision made on one tragic summer night in 1985 continues to echo through the lives it shattered.